Senator Deyalsingh, you have 26 minutes left.
Thank you, Vice President. And as I would like to continue the contribution where I actually elaborated that I was looking at the social ills, the social fallout that would have come about with the job loss that would occur, not affecting just the individual, but the family and also the trickle effect, or what you may call you get like a sort of effect, a whirlpool effect, where around that individual, their relatives, their jobs, and other contractors out there would also be affected by this social fallout. But as any caring government, we have seen certain measures in place, and I'm proud to know that I've known persons who have actually reached out to social services and have gotten some sort of relief, and also retraining job-wise. Some persons have reached out. So good things are happening, but there is still a gap where we are missing persons. And we have to know, how are we going to get that gap? How are we going to get an individual who has lost their job and not seeking that help? That individual is at home. So what I'm suggesting, it's our duty to see if we could reach out to that person, to try to get that person, to see if that person could come in. And my suggestion is there need to be a tie-in with the unions, and probably a tie-in with some social workers who are employed by Petroleum, where they can actually go to these individuals, track them, and see if there are any sort of mental problems, if there are any sort of depression, see if their relatives are saying there's an increased risk of alcoholism or domestic violence, which also occurs when you have job loss affected. Now, Senator Amin actually mentioned something I wanted to speak about also, the Augustus Long Hospital. And this hospital, I must say, it caters for, it's a 50-bed hospital, and there are excellent surgery that actually, surgical cases and surgery that is done there. And it actually offers a brilliant service. People who have accessed it, it's a lot of, good comes out of that. You hear good news, you hear people have been saying that sing praises for this institution. But you see, it's not just the Augustus Long Hospital. With that hospital, there are 7 medical centers attached to it. Point Fortin, Pointe-a-Pierre, Pinal, Santa Flora, Faizabad, Guaracara, and also there's a Trinma Marine Base. And all these caters to members, living in those communities also. So we need to factor in, if that hospital is not able to afford medical care to these personnel, those persons now will have to go elsewhere, and this could put a strain on our existing health system. We need to factor in persons who are already in the system and who would have had surgery booked. I think it's unfair to just leave those persons hanging and said, well, look, you had a surgery booked for next month. Sorry, you're no longer with us again. We leave you hanging. We have to factor that in, that human element, that human feeling, to see if we could finish certain certain promises we have given to medical care for certain personnel. So I would like to look at something that, we have to appreciate that outside, people are looking at what is happening to this bill. People are looking at, here again, we are now trying to see if we can create an entity, and if that entity, will be able to be financially, viable. And because we would not want to create an entity that 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, it turns the same sort of a financial monster that was created, I want to put it, with Petroleum. Now, we have seen blame game occur. The opposition, the government, each will blame each other. Each of them would have been blaming the certain personnel who were on the boards of Petroleum, and each side trying to probably, that's a game of politics, where this one will blame this board appointed by another government. But what I'm saying is, persons who look on, persons on the outside, with this blame game, I think it's a really a disgraceful state of affairs that were allowed to reach this level. And I don't think we can probably, blame one administrator or another administration. We probably may have to blame both, and we may also have to blame the failures of successive boards to stop that problem from occurring. So the average citizen now, they may feel cheated. They may feel exhausted when they hear allegations of corruption. So they may be looking at the allegations of corruption. People are suffering, and they're seeing, allegations going both ways. And the Prime Minister actually recently mentioned about false emails. We may be seeing emails. We don't know what is true, what is not true. But all that is an ongoing problem where the persons in the country, they are, under stress. And when they are seeing these things coming out, when they are hearing these allegations, there's a greater level of distress among our population. And I am thinking that if we are going to undergo the major undertaking to anoint heritage in place of Petroleum, we need to reassure the population. We need, that heritage would not go the way of Petroleum. We need to also have a duty to put systems in place, and as Senator Veras was looking at the systems, he was looking at transparency, accountability. Senator Timal also mentioned about having, I think you're giving the government a month to have certain aspects in place where we could look at any sort of, public misuse of funds, or, and I think there's a need to have a monitoring system in place so the public could have confidence. The public could look at this new company. The public could say there's a cap on spending, that there's a progressive report, that is public. Also, I guess the subcommittee in energy would have to be there and be given reports to the members of the public who will say, here we are now giving you another entity, but we need that entity to show that it's progressing, to show that it's there, it's not going into any sort of red. So we have to limit the state enterprise from depending on the Treasury as was done before. So we need to put in laws and practices in place to protect the public purse from corrupt public officials, to actually poor management systems, and also we have to have a transparent some sort of transparency mechanism in place where we could look and see what's going on there. The management of this new entities, or the management of the 3 new bodies, we may need to look at those management and systems and make sure it's working well. So I don't think, looking at those personnels now, I want to look at the hiring practices. It has been mentioned that certain persons may be on the 3 boards. So we have to appeal to the public that we are doing something that is transparent. We are having hiring practices as above board that no one will be able to look at. And I'm saying if persons who have been in a company that has, not done well, a company that has shown losses, I'm saying probably those persons, if they are hired over, they should take a cut in salary, or probably even, any sort of bonus, that probably they would have been gaining. Hold that until the company has started to show some sort of a financial success. I also look at the salary of the CEO, as was mentioned. And again, when I first read it, it brought it was a bitter pill to swallow, that here you are, persons don't even have, money to go and buy bread, on a weekly basis, a daily basis. Yes, certain people are really in that level of poverty or coming on the breadline. And the salary of the CEO, and it struck me, it actually, I was taken aback. But then, when I looked at, it's really, an undertaking that was taken by a company, and it's really probably a salary that it's first world hiring practice, a CEO. It comes like you're hiring the CEO, the standards are there, it's probably international standards. We have to try to attract the best CEO to try to run this company. So I understand that. And I understand that, the hiring of a CEO should not just be seen as a financial service. It should also be, take the factor into account about the emotional state of the person. So persons may see that and feel a little offended. Persons may see that and say, look at that salary that man is going to get. And we have been getting reports that some people may not like it, even though the explanation is it's a salary and standard with running a financial company that, like Petroleum or Heritage to be. So I am saying his salary also should be taken into account where it may have been negotiated at a lower salary and probably a rise in salary once that company can show some sort of financial success. So these are factors I think we have to take into account when we are dealing with the, not just job losses, not job, but we are dealing with the emotions of persons. We don't want an angry population out there who may want to vent, who may want to take it out on officials, So we have to factor those feelings and emotions in when we are having hiring practices. We have to factor in certain things in place where they will say that new entities, we have now put checks and balances to make it run efficiently. I mean, we just have to look at the history of Caroni. When Caroni actually was closed down, there was also a plan in place there for Caroni. There was a working document where the union at the time had proposal to actually make it and split it up and have it just as a holding company, just as the plan for that was in this bill here. And it was over 10,000 jobs that were affected. And again, you look at the 10,000 jobs, and probably again you look at the trickle effect, that will extend from that. But again, people in Caroni, they survived. So I am saying even some job losses in Petroleum, they will survive if they have the financial support from social services, if they have the support of retraining and know that we are there. So we are probably, those workers are probably fortunate that there are still jobs that may be offered to them when these three companies come on board. So there's some hope. There's some hope for some of these workers. And I'm happy that that would be afforded them. But what I would say in closing, that given the financial dilemma that the Petroleum has found itself in, I think the government had no choice to do what they had to do. And what I'm saying, now seeing that the numbers of us and the independents band had just showed that we have a choice. Government now has a choice. They had no choice in closing down, I think, but now they have a choice to put systems in place that could, prevent the same problem from occurring in the future, and probably listen to some suggestions from this side where we are asking them to give us a business plan. Thank you.
Senator Haynes.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I rise tonight to contribute on one of the most defining moments, I think, in our history, and definitely in my time in this Parliament. I listened intently to all the contributions so far, and I would just like to say very, very early on that what we've witnessed here today is it's almost a lesson in how our political communications is evolving. And I say that because you have several persons on the opposition bench, on the independent bench, persons outside who are asking for more information. What is happening? What are the details? Give us the details. And you have a government that insists at all ends that they have been completely forthright and that they have given us all the information and that we know all of the details and that we should be comfortable with this decision that we're being asked to participate in here today. And government ministers have spoken today. The minister in the Ministry of Finance, the Minister of Energy, the Minister of Trade, and they said a lot of things, but they never answered any of the questions raised by anybody in this room today. So what we are seeing is the provision of information by a government, by an executive, designed to tell a particular story in a particular way so that you can guide a population or a segment, because I don't believe they're targeting the entire population. I do believe they are targeting a segment of the population with with their consistent and persistent narrative that what they are doing, what we're being asked to do, is the right thing and is the only solution to a problem that they have never clearly defined. We've gotten a lot of information of what the problems are, all these, and it all boils down, I think, to a cash flow problem. But they've said a lot of things, wage bill, not enough production, and I'll get into some of those details. But as I sat here today and I listened and I tried to take notes, right, because I knew I was speaking later in the lineup. So I said, okay, I have all of this information, we've done all of this research, somebody's going to say something that I have to respond to. I have one page. And that's because while they spoke, they didn't say anything. They didn't tell us what in this vesting bill, what we are being asked to do here today, how is that the solution to the problems that they have outlined. After we've done all of this, and the bill will get passed because there's a simple majority, after we leave here today, after December 1st, all the problems they've articulated, they'll all go away? I don't think so. And so I say that from the onset because people are looking on at our parliament, at what we do here. Mm-hmm. And as they look on at us, as we discuss issues and we highlight issues facing the country, the fact is people are looking at us to give the solutions to the problem. And what the government has brought for us today is a masquerade. It's a pretend solution. You see, when this bill is passed, it's not going to be just a simple matter of bad law and bad legislation being forced through the houses, right? But it's also making a mockery of our time-honored democratic process and good governance. That is the key to our very own survival. And I say that because you've asked us to come here in the Senate before they were in the House, and the bill went through there. And there have been a consistent clamoring for more details, not the information that you're giving us, because I can guarantee you some of the speeches we heard from the government bench today, we've heard it before. We're saying, you've said that. Now tell us this. These are the questions we have. And the questions are blatantly ignored. I have to congratulate Senator Ramdeen, who has, from the beginning of this saga, been very clear on his questions, very detailed in his pursuit of information that the people of this country needs. And by virtue of that cabinet leak, it shows that people in their own government, on their own benches, are now saying enough is enough. We cannot continue like this. Further to that, we have gotten information from the board of Petroleum, and all of this information is coming to us. And all of this well, not the good ones anyway. All of this information, Madam Vice President, is coming to, sorry, Mr. Vice President. All of this information is coming to us because people are dissatisfied and unhappy with the way this process has continued. And we've said that from the beginning, and we will continue to say it. What you have done, you've done the wrong thing in the wrong way and at the wrong time. And we will continue to see the fallout. Well, actually, they will continue to see the fallout of what they have done. And I expect and anticipate more leaks from all over because the government is collapsing, or has collapsed, as a matter of fact, at this point. And what is more worrying and frightening in this issue is that in my preparation for today, I looked at the debate on the vesting bill in 1993 and what the discourse was like then. And what stood out to me then was a former PNM administration that when they sought to do something, and I had some issues with some of the things that I read, but what was clear was there was an articulation that what they wanted to do was ensure maximum participation by the maximum amount or number of persons in this country. And it was very clear as the minister, Ken Valley, then defined it, that what they had hoped to do was create an entity that the people of Trinidad and Tobago had some kind of interest in and that would work for us as a people. And as time goes on, and as things went on, it didn't work out that way. But now we have a government bringing a vesting bill. And at no point in time have they told us what was the overarching philosophy. And what is the idea? How did you arrive at the decision to do this, what you're doing here today? And as you are doing that, as you are, I think, taking a slash and burn element, as you are looking your sights on our valuable assets and then creating this noise. Because, like I said, while we're asking for more information, more details and specific details, the government has been very good in creating a lot of noise on this issue, a lot of distractions. Every day there would be somebody saying something, you would see them vacillating, you would see some flip-flopping, you're closing down the refinery, some people going home, not everybody, all these things. And we have, I think, as a nation, seen a persistent and consistent campaign by this government to muddle an issue, which if they were committed to the principles of accountability and transparency, there would have been no problem. Nobody's saying don't restructure the company, but what we're saying is the manner in which you have done it, the way you've gone about this, that's the reason for all these questions and conspiracy theories, as they would like to call it. Because the fact is, Senator Ramdeen raised issues, the new Senator Vera had questions. All of these questions are coming at you, and you are not answering them. There's a refusal to answer the questions. And I listened to Senator Deyalsingh, who made reference to a blame game, and that we needed to look at the span, our nation's history, and say, okay, maybe a lot of people have to take some responsibility here. And as he was speaking, I had to pull one of my documents that I had, and it's the same 1993 Petroleum investing bill. And Mr. Sudama was responding in that bill, and he said, today, thanks to 32 years of P&M rule, this is in 1993, yeah? Thanks to 32 years of P&M rule, we are still dependent for the major portion of our foreign exchange reserves, for the major portion of our government revenues, and in fact, some of the major stimulus to our economic activity on this one single industry. There's a failure to diversify this economy, a failure to have self-sustained growth that is not dependent on one single industry. Today, we are in that situation, as I said, thanks to 32 years of P&M rule. This is in 1993. What has changed? Very little. And I know they would come here and say, well, you were in charge for 5 years. What did you do? And I can go through what we did. But the point is, by your own admission, the majority of the time that we have been an independent nation, you have held the reins of power. So the question does fall to you. What have you done? And I will go through, Mr. Vice President, the fact that they've done a lot to get us here in this state of disarray. And the Minister of Finance, Minister in the Ministry of Finance, used a lot of words to create that this sense of urgency that I think in her opening she talked about our fiscal instability and they needed to do, and the minister pegged 2014 as the year in which things seem to have changed, and the falling oil prices what the minister looked at as the reason for us being here today. And I would ask in her wind up, if you are really taking a holistic look at the facts and really appreciative of what's going on here, I don't think that you can admit to yourself that that's true, that 2014 everything changed and that's how we ended up here. That's a little unbelievable, Mr. Vice President. And I think the presentation by the Minister in the Ministry of Finance in this bill represented another chapter in deliberate manipulation of information and secrecy that the government has perpetrated on the people of Trinidad and Tobago with respect to what is going on with this petroleum company of Trinidad and Tobago. And we've come to the Parliament and the nation at large. They've come here to Parliament and to the nation with a problem that they've created, pretending to be saviors. And you've heard time and time again that this is not a political issue and that we need to look at it through a different lens. And then you have the Minister of Trade coming here and saying, this is about the leadership of the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, and that this is a demonstration of his leadership. And I was very glad the Minister said that today, because the manner in which this is being rolled out, it would not end well. And they may stumble along the way, but what is happening, I do hope it serves as an indictment on the leadership of Dr. Keith Rowley. And I do hope that when the workers who are unemployed and the persons who stand to suffer the most from the fallout of this Petrotrin saga, I hope that they remember the words of the Minister of Trade and Industry, that this was a direct result of the leadership of Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley. And I think, as I, again, was preparing for this debate and before, because I've spoken on Petrotrin at several instances, but what I think stands out the most is that I've never witnessed a government employ a deliberate communication strategy to make ordinary citizens appear to be villains. And what you had today, because you heard it again today, you had this wage bill and this problem that if we get rid of it, you could get roads and hospitals and schools and all these things that they failed to provide in the last 3 years. So what they're saying is Petrotrin is the reason they have failed in the last 3 years to provide, to hold up their end of the governance bargain. Unbelievable, right, Mr. Vice President? So you target people, you zone in, and you said carpenters are making $75,000 a month. You're saying people going home with $500,000 at least. Everybody is rich. They are well taken care of. Their children are well taken care of. Everything is good. And then you have newspaper reports. Newspaper reports from October 15th, 2018 by Kevon Fleming. Not all Petrotrin workers getting a nice package. And I just would I'd use two quotes from this newspaper article. The Prime Minister spoke of enhanced separation packages for the workers. But there's nothing enhanced about this. I've worked for 26 years, and there's nothing enhanced about what they are giving. I am married, I'm paying a mortgage, and to be honest, this can cover my loans, but how will I live from month to month? It was pretty surreal when we got our letters. Over the last few weeks, people have been walking around like zombies because they do not know what the future holds. It is the uncertainty that is affecting us, and everyone is in a somber mood, the ENP supervisor said. Employees did not like the way they were treated by the company and the government. Petrotrin employees are people too, and at one time were carrying the country economically, and only in the last 3 years the government saw trouble. So we feel that we are being made to fall on the sword and bear the brunt of this restructuring. So the government, on one hand, is telling us that these people don't tell the truth. So somebody is giving us inaccurate information. And I don't know what this person who worked for 26 years, who received his or her retrenchment letter and subsequent package, stands to gain from going to the newspapers and saying it's simply not true. I am not a wealthy person out of this process. And as and then you listen to the discussion around the new executive hired and what the salary is. And then you listen to the problem articulated by the government about the wage bill. And so...
Sorry, at this point, the conversation is starting to become repetitive along those lines. The executive hired, the amount of money they're making, all of the senators that have spoken before have created their context and tied it in with the vesting order bill that's before us, speaking specifically to the companies or the assets that are being put into the companies. I've given you quite a bit of leeway in relation to your introduction and creating that context. If you can move on, or at least tie it into the assets or the companies that you're speaking of, but being mindful of the comments that have been made before, especially in relation to the executive, and I mean, the senator before you spoke to that as well. It's becoming tedious right now in relation to that.
Thank you for your guidance, Mr. Vice President. And I take your point that it had been made. I was just raising it in relation to what the comments were from the government side, that this was not indeed a problem, and just showing the juxtaposition. But when you look, what we're being asked to do with this bill, as it's stated, is to vest certain assets of Petrotrin into these 3 companies. And the bill is concerned with only the vesting of the assets. But what about the liabilities of Petrotrin, incurred mainly with the projects that we've heard about before, World GTL and the issues that came across with that kind of rampant spending in earlier times? You see, these new companies must generate a sufficient cash flow to service the requirements of the severance payments, the bond payments, and other current borrowings to fund, as Senator Ramdi noted, astronomical numbers in terms of consultancy. And you're looking now, I think, Mr. Vice President, at a proposed solution with this vesting bill, saying that these companies will solve our problem. But no one has given us the startup cost of the companies. You're looking at things like logo, branding.
Senator, again, because of your late position in the debate, I understand the difficulty to not repeat what has been, we've heard that comment before in relation to the startup costs, all of that has gone before. Your late position requires that you come with new information or new points in relation to the bill that is before us. So you're going to have to be a little bit more mindful in your contribution going forward as to what has been said prior.
Yes, Mr. Vice President. And, okay, we'll talk about vesting acts before then. So I took a look at the BWIA Vesting Act of 1995. And why I'm bringing this up is because the act before us, and I have in front of me the Act on Heritage, the one from 1993, Petrotrin vesting, and I looked at the BWIA Vesting Act of 1995. And of particular importance was the details that were given on the transfer of liabilities. And I was actually setting up that point before, that we've been asking for specific details. And we've been looking at how this is going to form a solution to the problem. And so if you look at the BWI Vesting Act of 1995, you're told the liabilities and obligations to the holders of valid passenger and freight transportation coupons that were purchased at the corporation's posted fares or distributed in connection with promotional or charitable events. So the question arises, and the Minister in the Ministry of Finance stated that this vesting bill is nothing new, it's been done before. But when they've been done before, you've been provided with particular details and a certain amount of information within the vesting bill. And so we have to question now, is it due to sheer incompetence that we have a bill that is so lacking in detail that we have to constantly ask more and more questions? Or is it a larger motive at play here? Is the information that we're being given deliberate to create a certain level of chaos or a certain level of we can't even look in the right direction because we're looking in all these different directions? And that is a strategy that when you employ it, when you employ a strategy like that, you have people running in several different directions and you can't even get to the bottom of it, which is, the bottom of this is this vesting bill, are all of these things that the government is doing, including the retrenchment of thousands of workers, will it be a solution to the problem that they have presented? And I would like to say it is not. It is not the solution to the problems that we have. And I think what we need to look at is, as this rolled out, as this Petrotrin saga rolled out, the government, led by Prime Minister Rowley, went through a number of statements that we had to question the validity of the statements, including that Petrotrin has paid no taxes and was a burden on the state. And the Lashley report that was commissioned by this government stated in unequivocal terms that during the period fiscal 2011 to fiscal 2015, Petrotrin had made tax payments the sum of $20.2 billion. So, between the period 2009 to 31st August 2018, Petrotrin had paid the Board of Inland Revenue the sum of $30.6 billion. So, as the dates there are also important, Mr. Vice President, because as you create this, as you try to move towards a particular end, and I have questions about when this, like I said, the information comes in different ways. And as I was preparing again, I looked at the legislative agenda from the government that was presented early in 2016, I believe. And under midterm legislation due September 17 to 2019, there's a Petrotrin vesting bill that was on their legislative agenda. And so, I've heard people allow the government to make excuses that this has been a quick process and they had to make decisions and things. We can expect that information would come in a piece as they come in. But you knew there was going to be a Petrotrin vesting bill since 2016. What else did you know then? And why were you giving us information in this manner so that, like I said, we're running around like headless chickens because they dropped the closure of the refinery on August 26th. We heard nothing from them until September 2nd. They said that the refinery was, some people were going home, not all, and it was deliberately muddled, Mr. Vice President. But I raised that point because at the point when Petrotrin stopped paying taxes would be under their tenure, under the tenure of this current PNM administration. And if you're saying Petrotrin did not pay taxes and royalties, and the timeline is important here, and Corporation Sole is the sole shareholder, isn't it a dereliction of duty by the Ministry of Finance in this case? Or perhaps it was just setting up Petrotrin for this for this eventual end here, so that when you come to us, you say, look at all these problems, look at this unsustainable entity. We have to do something. We have to do it immediately. We have to do it now. We have to do it before you have all the details. You have to do it before I give you any information, because it's critical. It will bankrupt the country. The sky is falling. This has been their constant modus operandi. The sky is falling. Rush everybody into a decision. Try to get the entire parliament to participate in their poor decision making. And this is decision making by the executive that they're trying to get all of us to say yes to. And that is why we will not say yes to this bill here today. I would like to look at the other deception on the wage bill, that we're paying $2 billion annually, and that the government, that we can't afford. We cannot afford these people. We cannot afford these people. But what is the other side of that? What is the other side of that coin? So who is going from the government is going to get up and tell us what Petroleum contributed to BIR and these employees, because they were not, as they were working there and we had to pay them wages, they were also taxpayers. Right? They contributed to our system. That's the way this works. But you're telling us that they were weighing us down and preventing all of us, including them, from getting roads, etc. But tell us, what would be lost from the closure of the refinery, from the collection of PAYE, from the thousands of workers that are being retrenched? And we must add that the taxes that are paid by contractors and businesses and people who do business with Petroleum, corporation tax, PAYE, green fund, VAT, business levy. What was that? What are those numbers? Because again, you're giving us some, but you're not giving us all. So you are giving us the picture that you intended to create so that we should feel comfortable about your poor decision making. What is the value of this loss? And you see, when you look at the totality of the picture, and I want to, they'll keep saying that we would not have done anything and we would have let our problem continue, but that's not the fact. What we're saying is what you have presented to us a solution? And if the answer is no, then what you're doing is, in essence, mamma-guying the public.
I have to raise at this point, a lot of what you're saying, for the majority of your contribution, is dealing with the narrative prior to what is before us. What is before us is the transference of assets into companies. Other senators have dealt with it in a contextual manner, because in order to make any kind of intelligible argument for this bill, you have to create some sort of a context, but it cannot be the meat or the sole point in your bill. So you've been talking about dropping the ball in relation to communication and the handling of all of the prior issues in relation to this. What I'm trying to get you to do is to now focus on the transference of assets. So just as an example, your colleagues have spoken to the effects of the transference of these assets in relation to employees of Petroleum, which is all well and good. What you are focusing on is in the narrative prior to all of that. So could you just start to focus on the transference of assets or even the companies themselves?
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I think where I'm trying to highlight that by their own admission in terms of their stated elements of the problem, that the vesting bill that is presented before us today cannot be considered the solution to that problem.
And that's fine. That's the major point that you're making, and I understand that, but that cannot be the only point for 40 minutes of a contribution. So as long as you're making that point, and you've made that point in the beginning, what I'm saying now is that you have to deal with the contents of the bill that's before us, which speaks to the transference of the assets. So you've made that point in the communication. So you are now engaging in what is tedious repetition or circular arguments in relation to that one point. If you have new information to bring to light outside of what all of the other senators that have contributed thus far have brought forward, I invite you to do so.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The essence of my contribution in this debate has been to give as much evidence as possible to back my thesis or my original claim. And I understand your ruling, but as we assess the validity of what is brought before us, which is, like you said, the vesting of certain assets from Petrotrin into these new companies. When we leave here, what are we saying? Are we saying that? My question is if the country should be comfortable with that we have done our best to provide these solutions. And I understand, but you have to make that point, you can take many different routes, and I'm showing that throughout the entirety of this thing. At the end of the day, what we have established as the facts is that the People's National Movement, by their appointments and that by their decision making, have created this problem before us. And that they've brought this bill to masquerade as a solution. And it is not a solution, and it is perhaps the creation of a bigger, more expensive problem. And that they've tried their usual blame game, where they've blamed the workers, and they've blamed everyone but themselves. And the fact is, and this is where I will conclude, because the fact is, Mr. Vice President, that they cannot manage, they cannot create, they cannot build, and what we're seeing right now is that they cannot tell the truth, and they certainly cannot take this country forward. Petrotrin is emblematic of what has happened to our country since September 2015. Chronic, persistent mismanagement. Decisions crowded by politics before people. And they've crashed our economy, and they've crashed the spirit of our people. So you know what happened if you want to know what will happen to our nation, if we continue with PNM management, you just need to look at what happened to Petrotrin. Employees are defeated, managers grow richer, and that is the essence of this PNM public policy. And so I end by saying today is a sad day for the nation, as we feel the full brunt of a government that could not care less about the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And you see what kind of damage they can really do when you do not act in the best interest of people. Thank you.
Minister of Public Utilities.
Mr. Vice President, today I stand to defend a bill that is necessary for the survival of our nation and the recovery of our financial legacy. Before I get into the heart of my presentation, let my other colleagues in the past who have gone before me, let me welcome to the chamber all the new independent senators. Service to humanity is the best work of life, and I'm sure you will find this contribution to be very enriching. This bill is about the restructuring of Petrotrin and the creation of an agile, efficient entities that will contribute to the Trinidad and Tobago economy. In its written form, it is about the vesting of assets in Petrotrin to 3 newly formed companies, i.e., Heritage Petroleum Company, and I moved straight into the Act. Part 2 of the Act, Section 3, talks about the vesting of the assets of Petrotrin into that company, Heritage. The Paria Fuel Trading Company, again, Part 3, Section 5, talks about that particular vesting. And of course, the Guaracara Refining Company Limited, and again, Part 4, Section 6, speaks specifically to those particular vesting. This is not something new. This is something that we have done before, and this is a viable proposition as it relates to moving the assets very quickly from one company into different companies. However, by implications, by implications of what has happened, it is about the financial stability and sustained development of our country and about the maximizing our natural resources for the benefit of the current and future generations. Mr. Vice President, talking about this bill or contributing here, it's a very emotional experience for me. Because as I've said in this house before, I grew up in Darley's Village, Santa Flora. My father worked in Petroleum, a parent company, or not a parent company, one of the companies before Petroleum, TPD, for over 40 years, retired at 55 years, retired at 55 and would have retired after 42 years service. My education was funded as a result of him working in Petroleum and going through the ranks in Petroleum. So I understand, I have a lot of friends who work in that particular area. I grew up my whole life in Faizabad after living Santa Flora, Darley's Village. So I understand what are the concerns and how people feel about what is happening in Petroleum. But even as I understand and empathize with the positions faced by Petroleum workers and the communities that are part of it, I must remind us all about one very important fact. And whether we like it or not, it is a reality. Companies cannot exist just for the creation of employment. That's the reality. If you set up a company in business and anything must be set up to fulfill an end result. You set up a bank, it is to provide service and financial services to people. If you set up a bank only to keep people employed, you will no longer have a bank. It doesn't work like that. Unfortunately, that was the basic premise under which we took over Texaco, which was later merged with other interests to form Petroleum. As you all remember in a New York Times article, it was actually said, and I quote, the government agreed to buy the money-losing refinery, officials say mainly to save more than 3,000 jobs. Mr. Vice President, it was a questionable and unsustainable premise 30 years ago, and with right now, it is still a decision that still bears fruit. You cannot continue to run a company just because you want to keep people employed. Mr. Vice President, without our intervention in this particular company, and we have said before, and you know, we have been saying and we have been giving information. So again, if you would like to understand, for some of my colleagues before, they need to then take the particular notes and ensure what we are saying. We have made the point in our projections that if this company had continued to operate under its present trajectory, the company would have been earmarked to lose close to $2 billion a year going forward. Now let's put that into perspective. We are talking about a company which is losing money now and projected to continue to lose more money. We talked about 5,000 employees. If you are going to lose $2 million a year, and who will have to pay that $2 billion a year? That $2 billion will come back to all of us, the taxpayer. To save 5,000 jobs, that is almost each taxpayer. We are basically paying close to $500,000 just for each one of us. That's the loss that we have to incur to afford us the ability to keep those individuals employed. You cannot run a company like that. Madam President, Mr. Vice President, not only must a company be profitable, but throughout $500,000. Yes, do the math. 2 billion divided by 5,000, 400,000. Throughout this lifespan, Mr. Vice President, not only must a company be profitable, but throughout its lifespan, it must go through changes to ensure its continued profitability, especially a company that is impacted. Please, Mr. Vice President, I continue to protect me from the grumblings. Especially companies that are dealing with international factors. Any business person will let you know that in the corporate world, inertia, when inertia steps into a company, then debt is at the doorsteps. So if you look at a company, one of the things that is important for a company is that throughout its life, it must go through changes. And that you cannot adopt a business model and say, this is the business model of the company and this is what it is for life. Business doesn't run like that. You need to change. And if you do not make changes, or what is called tweaking changes or tactical changes throughout the life of the company, at the end of the day, it comes upon you, and therefore you have to make large transformational changes. And basically, that is where that is the position under which we reached with regard to Petrotrin. When you looked at this company and you look at it and you take the decisions that we have made to separate the assets of Petrotrin and place them in separate companies, you have to again do that against the backdrop of what was Petrotrin, and could it have continued in its present form? The reality is, if you look at the financials, you will see that Petrotrin over the years, it's not now that Petrotrin has been losing money. Petrotrin has been losing money consistently over the years. The after-tax loss in 2015, it was $1.2 billion. In 2016, $4.3 billion. In 2017, $2.4 billion. That's the kind of loss. The company was going through very inefficient, and inefficiencies was rampant within the company. The company was over-leveraged and very debt-dependent. When you look at the level of debt that this company was carrying, the total liabilities of Petrotrin, all right, in the audited financial statements for 2017 was $36.6 billion. When you compare that with an equity of $3.9 billion, you understand that the company had a debt-to-equity ratio of close to 929%. Those figures are not sustainable. You cannot operate like that. Petrotrin was operating like a company. You know, when you have a country, right, when you are a country that has borrowed too much money and you have a debt-to-equity, the country with a debt-to-GDP ratio being very, very high, that a country like that, in a similar situation, if I have to take the analogy to a country with a debt-to-GDP ratio that is too high ends up in the arms of the IMF. All right? That is what needs to happen. Nobody wants to go there, but the country ends up there because of decisions that have been taken and the level of debt that is taken. And that is the kind of debt compared to the equity that Petrotrin was carrying. You know, there was a particular ratio that is called the Altman Z-score. The Altman Z-score is a ratio that you use in the financial sector when you are trying to do some calculations about the future of a company, and it's something that all international lenders will look at, all right, to determine what is the probability that this company is going to be bankrupt, right? It is called the Altman's Z-score. And that Z-score, it gives you ranges as to what is acceptable or not. So for example, A Z-score of over 2.9 means the company is in a safe zone. So after you do the variables, and the variables associated with that Z-score, there are different things that could working capital to total assets, retaining earnings to total assets, earning before tax to total assets, and some other factors. But it's an international factor, take my word for it. Z-score over 2.9 safe zone. 1.81 a Z-score between the ranges of 1.81 to 2.9 gray zone. A Z-score less than 1.8 distress zone. And the probability that this company, 90% surety over, when you look at it, 80 to 90% of the times when a company has scores of less than 1.81, within 1 year, they're in financial distress. So you as a financial person, you do a Z-score and you see that, you understand where this company is heading, and therefore you're not lending this company any money at all. At all. So what was Petrotrin's score when you did all of that analysis? Petrotrin's score moved from 0.73 to 0.44. Remember what I said. Anything less than 1.81, all right? 1.81, you are in disaster zone. Petrotrin was at 0.44. 0.44. 0.44 multiplied by 4 is about 1 point. So over 400% less than where the worst case was supposed to be. So understand what it is that you were dealing with regard to Petrotrin. I mean, if you bring it in, you look at the debt, you look at some of the ratios of this company, right? You take a look at the working capital ratio. The company was practically, couldn't have met the number of assets and liabilities. The ratio you like to see is a 1-to-1 position. They had current ratios of 44%. You're trying to get up to 100. You're at 44. You're at 46. You're at 40, at 50. Those are the kind of figures that you were talking about. So you could not, the point of the matter is this company, Mr. Vice President, was a company that if you decided to leave it alone, so when questions are asked, what was the underlying factor or the concept behind this restructuring of the company? Survival. Survival. I am answering a particular question that was raised. What was the underlying survival? The company needed to survive, because if it didn't survive and the company didn't survive, it would have been a burden on everyone else that in Trinidad and Tobago. And Mr. Vice President, as my colleague mentioned, another thing that is important in any company, Petrotrin, is about change. And going through change and going through restructuring. Petrotrin was one of the few companies in the world that, based on what went on, based on the financial shocks that they faced in 2015, 2016, that did not choose to go through any sort of major restructuring. When you look at companies, as we heard, there were companies all around the world, in large oil-rich companies, the Kuwait Petroleum Company, GE Electric, the Brazilian company Petrobras, the Nigerian oil company, the Abu Dhabi National Company. You had a lot of oil companies around the world that recognized that you needed to change. And therefore, again, why are we vesting? Why are we moving these assets from Petrotrin into these small companies? Because when you look at the change that those companies did, it wasn't any different. These companies moved and they changed, and the whole objective of the change was to make the companies more agile and more responsive. Because when gone was the era of these big integrated companies, that was a time. But the whole idea on when you're looking at best practice, so how did we come to this? Because we looked at how all of the other companies around the world restructured themselves and recognized that what you needed to do was to break up the companies and have them and make them more agile. Because that is what it is. That was one of the recipes for success. So therefore, we went along that road, and this is what it is. Now, even when these companies, and again, I could speak a little bit about this, because I was in Tesoro, I was in Petrotrin. I mean, when in those days, when this whole merger thing was around, right? When this merger conversation was around, at Petrotrin, which by the Petrotrin was the equivalent of what is being talked about at Heritage. When Petrotrin, we were very concerned way back then about what would have happened, because the writing was on the wall as to what would have happened to companies like Petrotrin. From way back then, but you know the names, everybody, we went along with it, because those companies, as a exploration company, you need to invest money in the drilling of new wells. You need to constantly be drilling wells to be able to increase production. And therefore, and that requires cash. When the companies were together with Petrotrin, Petrotrin found itself in a cycle. At the end of the day, the company did not have any cash, because the cash that was required, that was being generated from the petroleum, from the exploration, was now being used in the refinery, the loss-making entity of the refinery, which resulted in the companies, therefore, making losses and debt coming in all the time. So again, why did we choose to go this route? Because we recognize, so what does all of this have to do with regard to the new structure? This new bill speaks to a new business model that we are going into the petroleum into the petroleum industry. We are not getting out of the petroleum industry. We are not getting out of it. We have decided to use a new business model. Again, we have moved the assets of exploration and drilling into a new company called Heritage. This company, when questions are asked, what is going to happen? What is going to happen to the school, and what is going to happen to the community, and what is going to happen to the steel band? Again, instilling a kind of fear into people. And again, for the records, if Petrotrin, well, listen to the facts, well, listen and get the answers once and for all. If Petrotrin as a company, you see, you're not interested in getting the answer, you only want to call.
Minister, focus on the chair. What is happening is you're engaging the crosstalk. Focus on the chair and make your contribution.
If Petrotrin, thank you very much. If Petrotrin as a company, recording the types of losses that I mentioned before, was able to engage in all of the activities and all the social programs that they did, and I agree with you, I lived them and they did a lot, all right? Now that you have a situation where you are going to have, we now producing about 40,000 barrels a day in oil. The projections, as was said by the Minister of Finance in his budget presentation, was that the projections that we would be very quickly moving by way of investing more money and by able to generate more money in Heritage, that production will have gotten up to about 80, 70, I think it was 75,000 barrels a day. So therefore, we are putting money into into heritage, moving the assets into heritage, and the assets of heritage, now that they are generating their own cash and no longer having to subsidize a loss-making entity like the refinery, that company would now be able to increase its production from 40 to 75, makes sense, and therefore increase their profitability, which will allow for them to do a lot more for all the communities of Santa Flora, Beach Camp, Palo Seco, Point Forte, all those areas that you talk that are being affected, that will now be able to benefit not from a loss-making company, but from a company that is now profitable.
Mr.
Right?
For the member, I just thank you, member, to you, Mr. Vice President, because I read some articles on the newspaper of some of these steel pans and other community groups who are expressing their fear. Can we safely say that they could rest assured that their sponsorship will continue?
Mr. Vice President, of course, as a member of Parliament, I do not make decisions, those types of corporate decisions for these companies. These companies, and that's probably the difference here. These companies are run by a board of directors, and they're run by an executive management. And the companies will invest in whatever social programs that they feel are beneficial for the community, and the work will, whatever is required, will happen. So at the end of the day, so the fact of the matter is, Mr. Vice President, is when you look at these companies, what this restructuring will do is that heritage, with its increased focus on drilling and exploration, will now improve in profitability, and now that improved profitability position will allow now for a company that was a loss-making company, one that could not pay its debt, will now be in a position to pay its debt. So we are moving from a situation as a country where if we left Petrotrin as is, the projection was you will have to be funding Petrotrin and all the citizens of this country to the extent that the company will be losing $2 billion annually. And we are now, and as a result of its lost position, you would have now had, as a citizen, now have to take on as a country to now make and pay all of Petrotrin's debt, international debt, especially the big bond. Now that we are now having heritage, and we are now going to be investing and putting new capital and ensuring that heritage becomes profitable, we are now going to be in a position, and this is not only by myself, this has been tested by the banks. The consortium of banks that have looked at these projections, this is not us, right? The projections and the banks, the international banks that have looked at the projections are now saying, based on the projections that I am seeing, I feel comfortable that heritage, that this company will now be able to pay its debt. This is a far cry from when Standard & Poor's looked at us, looked at the old Petrotrin structure, and recognized that under no stretch of imagination, this company would be able to meet its $850 million debt. And as a result of that, by implications, said the country will have to make it. And therefore, that was the prime reason for our downgrade by Standard & Poor's. We have now turned that situation around by the deliberate action taken by us to a position that now we are now able to convince our international bankers that this new company will not only remove that debt from having to be paid by the citizens, but will now be contributing to the welfare of this country. You see, Mr. Vice President, as a country, we have a business model also, you know. as a country, we have a business model. The business model, just like I know, the model for us as a country is that we get taxes, we get money from our investments, and we get also money from some of our state enterprises that are profitable. That's where our income comes from. And then you spend that money on sending kids to school, on hospitals, and things that you want to subsidize. The reality is, if we choose to change that business model, and companies like Petroleum, where you was expecting to get income from, now reached a point where they are now losing money. Losing money. Nobody is going to come. Where the money is going to come from? Where is it going to come from? At the end of the day, you have to be able, and if you choose, then the model will change. Then we could change that model. We could say, easy to say, leave it as it is. Leave all the jobs where they are, because that is important. If that is what the country wants, and that's where the UNC would like to take this country, that's fine. You want to take it down their road, understand, then you will end up with, you have to then find that money. You have to find that money, because you are no longer going to be having a profitable state enterprise. And as a result of that, it's going to result in a number of other domino actions that will have to be taken. So, Mr. Vice President, we are moving these companies into smaller companies, more manageable companies, more focused entities, for a simple reason, because it is the business model that we think is going to be able to be sustainable and make these companies profitable. It is also an attempt to move us from a loss-making situation, all right, as a company and as a country, to one where we will be able to get revenue. You know, these are not easy decisions to take. These are not easy decisions for a country or anyone to take, because no one, but they are decisions. When you are faced with having to make a decision for all of Trinidad and Tobago, when I am faced, as much as it hurts me, because my family is affected, but when I'm faced in a situation whereby I have to take a responsibility to look at every citizen in this country, and when I have to make sure that every citizen in this country is able to continue getting free health care, every citizen is able to enjoy free education, as I was able to enjoy, then I have to make decisions that is right, not just for 5,000 employees, but for every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. And that is what this government is doing, and that is what this bill is about. Right? That is what this bill is about. And also, we are also going down the road in also making sure that these companies have all the resources that is required to give them a fighting chance. Now, Mr. Vice President, we have also heard, I'll just take a little segue and answer a particular question that, you know, again, is the sort of putting information out there and saying it, all right? And we clearly understand my Senator Ramdeen, where what he was trying to do, put out another something out there, and it will then find its way, you know, that there is discourse on this side, and information, discord on this side, and information from this cabinet is finding its way into his hands. Again, total fake news. And I join my colleague in condemning that type, because it is believed by putting it out there, it is creating something in people's mind that wants them to believe that is true. Total fake news. Now, in addition to that, Senator Obika talked about the 9%. Senator Obika talked about the 9% and the 9.5% that was being charged, right? The 9.7%, which was the rate on the bond that was being charged with that Petrotrin, and made the point, went on to make the point that that bond really should have been done at around 2%. Therefore, the country incurred a massive loss as a result of that. The reality of that, again, Senator Obika, again, when you are funding a bond, an international bond, all right, like that, again, you do not fund that against LIBOR, which is where you went to look at what was LIBOR at that time. Because it's a 10-year Treasury bond, all right, you look at funding those bonds against the 10-year Treasury bill at the time. That is the benchmark. So just like when you're doing a normal loan, you will use LIBOR plus. You will look at Treasury as being your benchmark rate. So I'm giving you a little bit. I didn't give you this course when I was talking. So this is it now. Let me put it on Hansard. So then the benchmark, if you go back now and look at when that bond was issued, you would have recognized that U.S. Treasuries at the time was 3.5%. So there was no way that the bond could have been issued at 3% because U.S. Treasury was 3.5%. Now, because of Trinidad and Tobago's rating at that time, you would have then done the bond, if it had a guarantee on it, would have been U.S. Treasuries plus about 4. The reality is U.S. Treasuries about 4 is what our rating would have given us. We ended up doing it at a little bit more than that. And the reason why it was more than 3 than before, because one, it didn't come with a guarantee. It was borrowing some Petrotrin. And it was also the size. You have to also factor that in your pricing because you're going to the international market for 850 million, not a little 100 million or 150 million. So if you're doing that, you would have had to add a premium for size. And therefore, the price of 9.75% for the bond it is a price that is justifiable and one that was done by all the professionals in the central bank. So the concept that you were talking about does not really hold. So I put that lesson to you on when you are math and how that rate came across. And let's put that on the Hansard so that you will understand. Now, Mr. Vice President, in summary, therefore, this action, the separation of these companies, all right?
And you say you have 5 minutes.
The separation of all these companies is an attempt to make the companies profitable. We are going to turn and we're going to expand. We are not getting out of the oil business. We are still going to have all those communities served by all the areas in the south of Trinidad. That particular business is expected to grow. As a matter of fact, that particular company, as you said, Heritage, is looking at employing at least 1,000 more people. Right, 800 permanent people, but as you know, in the oil industry, there's always a temporary staff. Because if you looked at Petrotrin and you looked at the ratio, Petrotrin ratio was 3,500 permanent and 1,500 temporary. So you will end up with that company employing about 800 permanent, and then if you add on the temporary staff, you are talking about people getting back employment in that area of close to 1,000 to 1,003 people. This is something I would like to close on saying this was a necessity. This was something that was required to save a very important industry for Trinidad and Tobago. Right? This is not something, and yes, I agree, we all have to learn from the legacies of what happened in Petrotrin. And therefore, we all, and what we are seeing here the fact that we all understand why it needed to happen, you know, we could not continue. But the fact that the country is witnessing when a decision that is clearly facing us in the face, and we have people, we have opposition, and we have members that are actually saying and making it look like if it is something that somebody else is doing because of ulterior motives or because we are demons on this side. We are only creating discourse, and that is what is doing discourse. These are the things that are what is damaging us and damaging our country. Yes, we have to learn from Petrotrin, right? Yes, we have to look at all the factors that got us to this position. Yes, we have to go back to our core values of discipline, production, and tolerance, and look and see to what extent us deviating from those values played a part in where Petrotrin ended up. Yes, we have to do all of that, but doing nothing was not an option. And therefore, what this government has put forward in this particular bill is an attempt, is what we feel comfortable will be needed to save this particular industry. And I am proud to support this bill and be part of this government who is prepared to make such a bold and a strong decision for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, all of our citizens. I thank you very much.
Senator Seepersad.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I would just like to take the opportunity to thank the members of this House for the warm reception I've received today. The bill in itself is very straightforward. It's not complicated. And the Minister of Energy gave a lot of information which helped me understand the context. But I don't feel that the Senate has been presented with specifics on what will be done differently to ensure the future viability and profitability of these new companies, and that the excesses and malpractices which are coming to light will not be repeated. Are we transferring the assets of Petrotrin to companies with the same morals or lack thereof? Mr. Vice President, I would like to ensure that these assets are secured and productive for future generations. And I would welcome further elucidation by the Honourable Minister. Thank you.
Honourable Senators, 1 second. Please permit me to congratulate Senator Seepersad on her maiden contribution to the Senate. Senator Mark.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, allow me to, first of all, congratulate all of my colleagues on this bench for their excellent contributions. I also would like to join you and my other colleagues in warmly welcoming the new senators who have joined us today, and we wish them well. I would also like to go on record to congratulate the sterling contributions, to recognize, I should say, the sterling contributions made by our outgoing senators during their stint here with us. Mr. Vice President, the last speaker spoke to the issue of restructuring of Petrotrin. And it is a term that has been used by several of the government speakers. The Prime Minister has also indicated that Petrotrin has been restructured. Unless I'm going mad, I don't understand, Mr. Vice President, that a company that has been literally cannibalized in terms of its assets and has been literally closed down is being advanced by the government as one that has been restructured. How can a company that has been closed down by this government be a company that is in a state of being restructured? It does not make sense. Mr. Vice President, may I remind you, BWI is now a paper company. It has been replaced by Carl. But you know, Mr. Vice President, it is still in our statute books. And it still operates. Has that company been restructured? BWI is dead. Petrotrin is dead. So why are you mamagaing and fooling the country by telling the country that you have restructured Petrotrin and you are restructuring Petrotrin? Petrotrin is dead. You have slaughtered, butchered, executed Petrotrin. That's what you have done. The PNM. And Mr. Vice President, let me tell you, very early, you see misinformation? This disinformation and skewed statistics, these are specialists in that particular department. It is a lot of misinformation, disinformation, skewed statistics coming from the government side as they seek to mama-guide the country. One of the things that they have studiously stayed away from, and I haven't heard from the Minister of Labor as yet, you have not spoken about your destruction of the trade union involved in the industry. You have not discussed that. And Mr. Vice President, I will show in my contribution where, and I am sure that if the Honorable Minister of Labor was in opposition today, she would have made life hotter than a chula.
Senator. It is a very late hour, and I am astounded by the amount of energy that everybody still has. But that being said, the member is making his contribution, and he is allowed to do so and have silence when he's making his contribution. Member, continue.
Cool. No, I'm not attacking you.
You are.
I'm saying that you are silent and you need to speak out.
All right.
That's what I'm saying.
Senator.
Next thing you know, I need to recuse myself from the issue.
Minister.
You want it true now.
Again, we are all awake. I'm absolutely sure of that now. But I really don't want to have to extend the amount of time that we're here because I have to get to my feet and rule. Senator, you're making your contribution. Please let there be silence when he's making his contribution. Allow him to make his contribution. Continue, Senator.
Very much, Mr. Vice President. So, Mr. Vice President, what I'm saying is that the government has attacked, subverted, undermined the trade union movement and particularly the Oil Fields Workers Trade Union in this massacre that has taken place involving the closure of the refinery and Petrotrin. And Mr. Vice President, you know my honorable friend who is rushing towards the head of the class because his ambition is to be something else, but I'll deal with that at the appropriate time. But my colleague who spoke before me, Mr. Vice President, that is the Minister of Public Utilities, who is now Vice Chairman of the party, of the PNM. I want to congratulate him because I know his aim is to become the leader of the PNM. So Mr. Vice President, what the Honorable Minister of Public Utilities said, and he made some points. Losses, Mr. Vice President. Again, a common narrative. Losses. He said there were no drilling taking place. All in a justification in order to say Petrotrin must be placed in a coffin and buried. But Mr. Vice President, I will tell you this evening that it was the PNM, and it is the PNM between 2015, when they assumed the reins of power, to the current time, like the sea bridge, Mr. Vice President, that you are aware of. Yes. They crushed the sea bridge, destroyed Tobago's economy, just as how they crushed Petrotrin and destroying Trinidad. That is what they are doing, Mr. Vice President. It seems, Mr. Vice President, that the objective of the PNM between now and 2020 is to leave Trinidad and Tobago as a wrecked and wasteland. That is what the PNM is about. Mr. Vice President.
Order 46-1.
Continue, Senator.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, I want to draw to your attention some pertinent issues. Mr. Vice President, what my honorable colleague, the Minister of Public Utilities, did not tell the Senate is that between 2015, under the leadership of Andrew Jupiter board, they did everything in their power to undermine Petrotrin. I'll give you an example, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, there were two excellent persons working at that place called Petrotrin. One gentleman by the name of Ron Huff, he was the chief financial officer. He was able on his own to secure $500 million without any security from the Credit Suisse. Credit Suisse, you know, and that went to the Minister of Energy and the Minister of Finance, Mr. Vice President. I thank you, sir. You know, I told you I can't be too at my neck, doctor, but I'll look at you. But you'll understand what I have to do. So, Mr. Vice President, $500 million US unsecured loan, Mr. Vice President, in terms of any security. The PNM under Dr. Keith Rowley, the Prime Minister, and the Minister of Finance, they turned down, Mr. Vice President, and they canceled that loan. And the Minister of Energy is aware of that action. Mr. Vice President, they fired both a fellow called Mr. Ron Huff and a next chap called John Barton, who was in charge of refining and marketing during that period. Excellent people you got rid of in order to accomplish your mission. Mr. Vice President, you know what they did too? They canceled, and the Minister of Energy is aware of it.
What's the point in? Just what's the point in?
Oh, sorry. I can't point. I'll just be like a soldier. Mr. Vice President, I have to point to you. Eh? Yeah. Mr. Vice President, you know what is important here? The Minister of Energy is aware. that there was a project. The project was called Mobile Offshore Production Unit Project. That was designed, Mr. Vice President. A contract was issued to Wells Services Limited and TOSL to produce 5,000 additional barrels of oil a day for Petrotrin. The PNM under Dr. Keith Rowley, the Prime Minister, instructed Jupiter. Let him deny that. Did the Prime Minister instruct Jupiter to cancel that contract? What role did Cabinet play in that matter?
You continue to point at them. That's why I ask you to, one second, Leader of Government. That's why I ask you to focus on me. You could point at me, but just be mindful of the pointing or the gestures towards other members.
On
the
a
Leader
point of order,
is asking to give way. Do you give way?
Imputed improper motives to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister never did and will never do no such thing in terms of the interference of the operation of it.
I'll just rephrase it. Dr. Keith Rowley, Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, politically appointed board, took a decision to cancel a project that was already issued to 2 firms in South Trinidad to produce 5,000 more barrels of oil. Tell me if the Minister of Energy, is not aware of that. He's aware. And I want to indicate to you, Mr. Vice President, that drilling at Trinma came to a halt in July of 2016. Under whose board? Under the Andrew Jupiter board. Mr. Vice President, I must tell you, there was an orchestrated, calculated, premeditated decision by the People's National Movement to destroy Petrotrin. That is what they did. And they come here in this parliament and they go all over the country, giving the impression to the nation that they are the saviors of Petrotrin. And Mr. Vice President, when you go through this matter that we are dealing with, the amount of legal loopholes they have created in this order, this vesting bill, is to accomplish a number of objectives. And I would like the minister to explain to us, why have they brought a bill before us? And in this bill, Mr. Vice President, if you look at the 1993 Petrotrin order, vesting order, and you look at the bill that we have before us, Mr. Vice President, there's a big difference. But you know what the minister said today? The minister in the Ministry of Finance? The Honorable Minister said, it is the identical bill that we did in 1993 that we are dealing with today. That is what the minister told us. Mr. Vice President, that is a falsehood. It is an untruth. Mr. Vice President, on page 5 of the 1993 vesting order bill, 4.1 sub B, it states all collective agreements within the meaning of the Industrial Relations Act or any replacement or modification thereof in existence before the appointed day to which Trintoc and Trintopec were parties shall be construed, Mr. Vice President, and have effect as if Petrotrin were a party thereto. Why did the government not put that in this vesting order? You know why? Because the government is anti-trade union anti-working class and anti-people. That is why the government has been put in there. I call on the government this evening, if it is not anti-working class, if it is not anti-trade union, if it is not anti-people, to amend this order this evening. Amend the vesting order bill and include in it this provision that was in the 1992 Petroleum vesting order. You won't do that. You won't do that because the government is very clear, Mr. Vice President, on what it is about. So the government cannot fool me or any one of us on this side. We are clear on what this government is about. There's a link between, and I'll show you later on, there's a link between sandals and this bill that we have before us. But I will tell you about that as I press on. Let them think about it. Mr. Vice President, the government, this PNM government is a very evil government. It's a very evil government. And this government is destined to be kicked out of office in the next couple months. The masses of people are waiting like my colleague would have said, Mr. Vice President, in the years gone by, it will be like a chula, hotter than a chula. When they get to the polls, whether it's local government or whether, Mr. Vice President, it is national election, it will be a total massacre in this country where the masses face this PNM government in the local and general elections due in 19 and 20 respectively. Mr. Vice President, look at the preamble to this bill. Mr. Vice President, you would agree with me that information is the currency of any genuine democracy. You agree with me?
I agree.
And because we are dealing with energy, it is the fuel of any society. Mr. Vice President, you know what is happening today? We are debating measures of a gigantic proportion in terms of its impact on our society and its future stability. But you know what this government has done? I call it a kleptocratic government. Authoritarian and oppressive. You know what they have done, Mr. Vice President? They have tied our hands behind our backs. They have literally handcuffed us as a parliament. They have shown contempt and disrespect and contumely to this parliament. Mr. Vice President,
no, Senator,
do you know...
Senator, that particular phrase and lining is going down a line of imputation. I would just ask you to refrain from that particular line, the last two phrases that you just made, in moving forward.
Mr. Vice President, you would agree with me that if you have to make a proper decision and judgment on any matter, you need information, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, the government is asking us in this parliament to support a bill. And you know what, Mr. Vice President? They have not bring to our attention and table in this parliament, one, the Solomon and Associates report. But you know, Mr. Vice President, the Honorable Minister in the Ministry of Finance has indicated that that report formed part of the decision-making process. So the government, Mr. Vice President, which is accountable to this parliament under 75(1) of the Constitution, they have denied us information. So the Solomon and Associates report, we have never received it, even though, as you know, Mr. Vice President, I requested it. Mr. Vice President, the McKinsey report, they have never produced it, and they have never tabled it. So we as senators are being called upon. They have blindfolded the senators on the opposition bench. And they want us, Mr. Vice President, to support a bill. And there is no information for us to make a judgment or a deliberate decision on. Where is the Solomon and Associates report? Where is the McKinsey report? Mr. Vice President, do you know that we spent millions of dollars on a Canadian forensic audit team by the name of Kroll, Canada, to do an audit into the fake oil scandal. And they backed it up further by bringing a firm from the UK called Gaffney and Klein, another forensic firm, to look into the fake oil scandal. Mr. Vice President, they are closing down Petrotrin. They are handing over all the assets of Petrotrin to a company called Heritage in terms of exploration and production, which is where A&V Oil was located. Mr. Vice President, they have not made those reports available to this Parliament. Mr. Vice President, how can a nation, how can a people, how can a responsible Senate take decisions without information? Mr. Vice President, we cannot. And therefore, we are calling on the government, if they are serious, to make available, first of all, they should withdraw this bill. This bill should be sent to a special or a joint select committee for further deliberations, and they should populate that committee, where is the Energy Committee, with the relevant documentation. But Mr. Vice President, I have no confidence that they will do it. You know why? Mr. Vice President, you know why? The government sent the Lashley report to the Energy Committee. They had meetings in December, January, and February. And after that, the Minister of Energy could testify here and rise if he wishes. After February of 2018, they never met on that matter. And we had taken the decision as a Parliament, based on the Prime Minister's utterances, to refer this matter to that committee, the Joint Select Committee on Energy, so that they could do a proper in-depth analysis on the future of Petrotrin. We never received a report from that committee. Instead, this government had its own agenda, Mr. Vice President, and they rushed. And you tell me about alternatives, Mr. Vice President? This government had alternatives, and the only one that they saw viable was to shut down Petrotrin and the refinery. That is the only alternative that you could have come up with. This is a bankrupt and lazy administration. This government, Mr. Vice President, is not prepared to think, and they are not prepared to embrace others, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, this situation, as you know, will have far-reaching consequences for our nation and our people. Mr. Vice President, something that the Honorable Minister of Energy is not telling us, and I hope that he would tell us a little later on, or at some future time. Mr. Vice President, what is going on with National Petroleum? What is going on with National Petroleum? But before I go to National Petroleum, Mr. Vice President, I go to the preamble of the bill. It tells us that Petrotrin has agreed, Mr. Vice President, Petrotrin has agreed to transfer all of the assets relative to its exploration and production operations to Heritage Petroleum Company. They want us to believe that, Mr. Vice President, there was a survey in Sunday's newspaper, the 18th of November, on page 11. 13% of the people strongly trusted the Prime Minister. You know what it means, Mr. Vice President? It means that 87% of the people literally do not trust the Prime Minister. That is what this means. And Mr. Vice President, they want you and I and the Senate to trust them. We demand the Minister of Energy to bring to this Parliament now the resolution taken by Petrotrin to agree to transfer all its assets to Heritage Petroleum. Where is the resolution? Where are the minutes, Mr. Vice President, to confirm this decision? So you have a lot, Mr. Vice President. If you look at the preamble, you will see where Petrotrin has agreed to transfer all of the assets relative to its terminaling operations to Paria Fuel. They are asking us to trust them, and we must give them approval to transfer, Mr. Vice President, tens and tens and tens and tens and tens and tens of billions of dollars of the citizens' assets in monetary-wise, Mr. Vice President. How can we do that? Mr. Vice President, this government is looking for a revolution in this country. I want to tell you, Mr. Vice President, Hitler in Germany used his majority in Parliament, because he had the majority, to pass unjust laws against the Jews. He passed unjust laws against the Jews. He ended up exterminating over 5 million innocent Jews in Germany, Mr. Vice President. The PLM today in this Parliament, they have the majority, Mr. Vice President, but they have brought an unjust law. This is an unjust law. But because they have the majority, Mr. Vice President, the ayes will have it tonight. But they are playing with fire in this country. They do not understand the implications of what they are doing. Mr. Vice President, can you imagine 10,000 people, 400 firms or companies? When you add up all those numbers, you're talking about close to 100,000 people in the south and central of our country who are going to be affected by the decision taken by this government through this piece of legislation. You understand the implications of that, Mr. Vice President? You understand, Mr. Vice President, when people are hungry? Well, in a place called France, there was a lady called Marie Antoinette. And when the people were hungry and they were marching and they wanted jobs and they wanted bread, she said, let them eat cake. She was beheaded by the masses of people in a revolution. I am not wishing that for anybody. But I'm telling you, Mr. Vice President, if this government continues how it is going, what we are discussing here tonight, Mr. Vice President, is equivalent to economic treason against the country. How can we as a Senate support economic treason? That is what the government is asking us to do, Mr. Vice President. They are abusing this country and its citizens. And we are here, Mr. Vice President, to protect our citizens against any economic abuse or rape or violence by anybody, be it government or anybody else, Mr. Vice President. And that is what the government is doing. And we cannot support that. Mr. Vice President, I ask you to bear with me. Mr. Vice President, Petrotrin, they haven't told us nothing about National Petroleum. All we getting is rubbish from the government, all talk, garbage. That's all we are getting from this government. So, Mr. Vice President, let me tell you, the Minister of Energy is not here. I have a story to tell on him, but at the appropriate time, I'll deal with him. No, I have a story. There's a judgment, Senator Ramdi, by Justice Harris, the 12th of October, 2016. Okay. All right, Mr. Vice President, I wouldn't deal with that. Mr. Vice President, I'll come back to that at the appropriate time. Mr. Vice President, I asked the government to tell us what will happen to National Petroleum. Mr. Vice President, you understand what is happening in Trinidad and Tobago? They are asking us, Mr. Vice President, to give up our energy security in this land. They are asking us to now pay a higher price for imported refined products. And they are telling this country that is a better option than us in Trinidad and Tobago refining our own products. Mr. Vice President, Trinidad and Tobago has been producing oil since at least over 110 years now. If the PNM had put in its manifesto that one of its promises in the campaign was to shut down Petrotrin, shut down the refinery, get rid of 10,000 workers, you think the PNM would have been in power today?
Never. Never.
But, Mr. Vice President, they tricked the population.
Yeah.
They mama guide the population. They told the population that they were going to support the trade union. And what have they done, Mr. Vice President? What have they done, Mr. Vice President? They bust the throat of the trade union. That's what they did. And that is why I was very, very concerned about my colleague. I prefer to leave the government than to be part of it. Mr. Vice President, I was made to understand that NP will now be called upon to buy gasoline in US dollars. They'll have to pay, Mr. Vice President. And my information is that they may have to spend about $175 million in excess of what they currently pay in an effort to buy gasoline and other fuel for you, myself, and others to use at the pump, Mr. Vice President. I would like the Honorable Minister or the government to indicate.
Senator, you have 5 more minutes?
Yes, Mr. Vice President. What will happen to that situation involving the purchase of gas, whether it's premium, whether it's diesel, whether it's super gas, Mr. Vice President, or gasoline? What will happen? Mr. Vice President, I would like to know what will happen also to LPG. Would people be called upon to pay more for LPG, Mr. Vice President? Let us know. Mr. Vice President, I want to tell you this evening that this vesting order bill is a massive con job perpetrated by a government aimed at covering up the A&V oil scandal and the fake oil scandal. It is all part of a package to hide. Mr. Vice President, do you know the weaknesses involved in the A&V $100 million scandal? You know what the government is going to do, Mr. Vice President? With the transfer, you know is relevant? Yes. Mr. Vice President, let me tell my friend who is pleading ignorance. Mr. Vice President, when you transfer all the assets from Petrotrin into Heritage Petroleum. You know, Mr. Vice President, what you are doing? You are getting rid, as you know, of 5,500 workers. You are getting rid of the whole internal audit department. You are getting rid of all the witnesses, Mr. Vice President. So you are starting almost almost like with a clean slate, literally. So all the witnesses that's supposed to come forward to say Nizam Bash did that, they're gone. So it is a clean slate. So this bill is a cover-up in terms of corruption, and we cannot support that. Mr. Vice President, if we want to conduct any inquiries into the WGTL failed project, that is a cover-up. We cannot get witnesses. So they are asking us, Mr. Vice President, to create legal loopholes in an effort to cover their tracks. This is what this bill is about. And that's why I said, Mr. Vice President, it is an unjust law that is before us today. And there is a price to pay for these things, Mr. Vice President. Not for long. It can't go on for long. People have limited patience, You can't continue to oppress people forever. And you cannot use legislation and use your majority when you know the law to be unjust, when you know you have denied us information, when you know you have denied us reports. We cannot make proper decisions, Mr. Vice President, because we don't have the documentation before us. And you want us to come and vote here this morning or tonight? How can we vote for an unjust law? We can't, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, this government does not care about people. This government is doing everything to undermine democracy. Mr. Vice President, even before you were born and you were born, in 1937, there was an uprising led by Chuba Bus Butler against the colonial power structure. You know for what, Mr. Vice President? Freedom, the right to vote, the right to elect their own government at the self-government level. They were fighting for basic rights of the trade union movement. Today, this government is oppressing and repressing the trade union movement. What does that mean, Mr. Vice President? It means that you are suppressing and subverting and undermining democracy in our country. That is what the government is doing, Mr. Vice President. So, Mr. Vice President, in all honesty, when we look at this bill objectively, we see it as a massive deception. We see it as a massive con job. We see it equivalent to economic treason being perpetrated by this government. We see it as being unjust. And we cannot support legislation that will strangulate and slaughter and massacre the ordinary people in our country. We will not support this bill, and therefore I serve notice for the government to withdraw it. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, a lot of heavy weather has been made about the rationale behind what we are seeking to do, the fact that we are hiding information, the fact that we are seeking to deceive the people of Trinidad and Tobago, none of which is true. Let me start with a very sensational comment made by Senator Mark, as he is wont to do. We said we were restructuring BW. BW is dead. The same thing will happen to Petrotrin. Now, my grandmother had a saying, like stick breaking your ears. Because regardless of how many times we say the same thing over and over, there's a lack of understanding. When we talk about restructuring Petrotrin, like when we talked about restructuring BV, we were not talking about the vehicle through which the operations were conducted. We were talking about the operations. What did BV do? BV ran the state airline. What does Petrotrin do? Petrotrin used to refine oil, and it explores and produces oil. Those operations of Petrotrin, apart from the operation that we decided to close down, like the operations of BV, now through CAL, will continue to exist. So when we talk, as I said, about restructuring the entity, we are not talking about the vehicle. We are talking about what the entity does and what we are doing about those operations. The operations of Petrotrin are not being shut down. For the members of the public who are still listening at this hour, the operations of Petrotrin are not being shut down. They are continuing to operate through the four vehicles that are being created. What we are doing is shutting down the refinery. And the reason we are shutting down the refinery is because, as my colleague, the Minister of Public Utilities, indicated, the refinery is an unsustainable, unprofitable operation in its current form. And what it is doing, it is dragging down the rest of the company that has the potential to make income, to make profits for the benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So that if we were to continue along the path that we are going now, what the experts have told us is that the Petrotrin would need an injection of $25 billion to sustain its operations, including the refinery. Because, as my colleague, the Minister of Trade and Industry, said, by 2020, we will not be able to sell what Petrotrin is currently producing through the refinery because the quality is not what the world is prepared to accept. So the only way we would be able to continue to sell that product is if we find a way to improve the quality. That requires capital expenditure of significant amounts. We have asset integrity problems both at the refinery and in the operation business. We have had massive oil spills. We have been fortunate to date that they have not been more catastrophic than they have been. But it is only a matter of time, if we do not address the integrity of the assets, that we do not come upon a catastrophe that may be in the region of what happened in the Gulf of Mexico with BP. We cannot afford that as a country. We have to deal with the integrity of the assets, and to do that, we need an injection of funds. Do we continue to put the limited funds that we have into the non-profit making operation that is the refinery, or do we accept finally, after all of these years, that the refinery will not, in its current configuration, be a profitable operation, and switch our limited resources and capital into the element of the Petrotrin operation that can give us a positive return, which is exploration and production? So this is why we have decided to take the route that we have taken. To correct a comment made by Senator Mark, I did not in my presentation say that the Petrotrin investing order is identical to what we have before. What I said, and I will quote, Mr. Vice President, the effect of the Petrotrin investing order was to permit the business operations of both Petrotrin and Trintopec to not only be merged, but continue uninterrupted under the management of Petrotrin. And we are seeking to do the similar thing with this vesting order. We are seeking to merge, to restructure the operations in a manner that is quick, that is efficient, that is cost effective, and that will prevent a delay in the transfer from what we have now to where we're going. That is the objective of the vesting order, and it is for that reason that we are using the same approach that we used when we did the Petroleum vesting order. It is not that they're identical. The circumstances are different, and therefore there are differences in the order. Senator Seepersad, I congratulate you on your maiden presentation, short as it may be, but very effective. You echoed something that Senator Richards raised. What will we do differently? What we will do differently is that we will have closer monitoring of what is going on. What we will do differently is we will ensure that we have plans, that we have proper reporting and periodic reporting so that we know how the company is progressing as things go along. We won't leave it until whenever. Senator Timal also raised the issue of having a plan. Yes, we understand the importance of a plan, and in fact, there is a plan. We did not produce the plan here today, but what I sought to do in my presentation was to let you know what the plan indicates in terms of the company having reviewed the proposed operations and projected both the income and the expenditure that will come out of those operations. It is from that plan that I could indicate to you that the projected profit is in the region, conservatively, of $200,000 US a year. That came out of a very specific plan designed by the company. The company is using this plan to seek refinancing of its operations. Senator Hunte would have mentioned this. Senator Obika indicated in his presentation that this restructuring is going to further burden the state because we are going to have to refinance and the state is going to bear the cost of the refinancing. I am happy to say that while we continue to support the company through the transition stage, the plan that the company has devised, which the international lenders have accepted as being very reasonable and acceptable, indicates that the company will not need the support of the government to settle its debt, which is a complete turnaround from where it is currently. Currently, as I indicated earlier, the company is required to run the refinery on a day-to-day basis. It has to purchase oil, crude oil, in the quantum of 100,000 barrels a day. If we continue operating the way we're operating, the company will have to continue doing that, purchasing oil to run the refinery. To run a refinery, which is a loss-making operation. As my colleague Senator Khan indicated, the refinery is operating in a way that cost the company $2 to $5 US per barrel in losses on each barrel refined. So what has been happening for at least the last few months is that every time the company has to make a purchase of crude oil to keep operating the refinery, to keep the jobs going, it has to come to the government to say, I need to buy this oil, I will not get credit without your support, so give us a line of credit, give us a letter of credit. Or guarantee.
A guarantee. Every time the Petroleum has to go to the lenders or to the suppliers to acquire oil, which it needs to do on a daily basis. It's not something that's periodic. It has to get government support to do that. If we continue along this line, that will continue to happen. That is not sustainable. Every time the government extends a line of credit, extends a guarantee to
Petrotrin, it hits the government's total liability and reduces its ability to borrow for other purposes and weakens its rating. Yeah. So it is for that reason that we cannot continue. Petrotrin is one of the key factors that the rating agencies looks at every time they come to Trinidad because they know the potential impact on the government. That is the one factor that we think is more likely than not to downgrade us unless we change things. What does a downgrade mean for Trinidad and Tobago? It means that all our borrowing costs will go up. We already are paying, I believe it's 20% of our expenses towards interest. We can't afford to increase that anymore. So we have to ensure that we are not downgraded. One of the important factors in ensuring that we are not downgraded is dealing with Petrotrin. So, as I said, where we are now is that every time Petrotrin needs a line of credit, it has to come to the government. Yeah. We are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel because the company is satisfied and its lenders are satisfied that with this restructuring, it will no longer have to get that support. The restructured operations are expected to be able to pay for themselves and allow the company to settle its debt without government support. So our support is continuing to be supplied in the short term for the transition, and thereafter we expect it to come to an end. The company is currently negotiating its lending facilities, its refinancing facilities. No anticipation of a guarantee needed to be supplied to the government. That is a significant change from where we are currently, and that alone justifies the restructuring. The liabilities of Petrotrin, why are we not transferring them? Question from Senator Haynes. We are not transferring them because we are keeping the entity that is Petrotrin alive to deal with those legacy issues. We do not want to burden the new operations with those issues so that we are leaving Petrotrin to deal with those, including Senator Mark A.V. drilling. The matter is already before the court. It will be dealt with in the normal course of things. Decisions will be made. The court will decide what needs to happen, and that will happen without the interference of this government.
It's a court matter.
We do appreciate that the restructuring creates job losses. It is not something that we took lightly. It is not something that we are treating lightly. We are, as part of the termination, the company is providing the employees with the support, and I appreciate that there are those who will not come forward for the support, and I don't know what measures can be put in place to deal with them, but the support is available for anybody who wishes to take advantage of it. But we had to weigh that against the implications for the 1.3 million Trinidad and Tobago citizens if we did nothing. And although it was a hard decision, it was the only decision that we had available to us, because doing otherwise or doing nothing would have resulted in much more detrimental implications for us all. Senator Timal recognized the importance of World Children's Day. And as you will see, our colleagues, my colleagues, also recognize it, and it's not just a mama guy approach. We decided to openly support the Children's World Day because we appreciate the importance of children for our future. We are custodians of Trinidad and Tobago for the benefit of the children who will come in the future. And the choice that we had with respect to Petrotrin is to burden those children, the future generations, with a debt that was unmanageable, or to convert the entity to a state of profitability so that they could get a return, so they could have an additional source of income to secure their future. Because remember I said, not only do we have the existing debt, which is already hefty, the only way we could continue to operate was to pump an additional $25 billion into Petrotrin. Imagine the impact of that on the future generation. So we had that choice on the one hand versus the choice of shutting down the refinery and admittedly negatively impacting net 3,200 jobs direct, or leaving it in a state where the whole country could be negatively impacted by the burden of the debt and the burden that is Petrotrin. So it was a tough decision, but it's one that we did not really have a choice on. So we did take the future generations into account, and we decided it would not be responsible of us to do anything other than what we are doing. They would not benefit if we didn't take strong action. Senator Hussain made some strange points, among them being that the company's documents indicated that there was no restriction on the transfer of shares and there was no restriction on the power to create bylaws. I don't know if you can point to a list of state companies where the company incorporation documents indicate that there's a restriction on the transfer of shares. Was there a restriction on the transfer of FCB shares when the last administration sold 25% of those shares? It is not customary. The standard approach in incorporating companies, whether it's a state company or not, is to not place a restriction, except in very limited circumstances. And it is then up to the corporation sole, with the concurrence of the government that the corporation sole is part of, to determine what should or should not happen with that state enterprise. So saying that because the incorporation documents are in the standard form means that the state may lose control of Petrotrin, I find it's a stretch of an argument. You also point, Mr. Vice President, sorry, Senator Hussain also talked about illegal actions in this restructuring. There is no illegality. We are transferring the land from PSAEL to Petrotrin because we have been advised that the attempt to transfer in 2015 was not effective. So if the order in 2015 is invalid, then there's no need to revoke it in order to transfer it through the vesting order. The Senator Khan would already have dealt with the issue of Mr. Wiley, so I will leave that alone. Senator Richards, I do acknowledge your concern about the issue of continuity. And it is something that we need to deal with. But it will be difficult to deal with in the context of this order. We'll have to deal with it in a more comprehensive manner because our system of government and elections and every 5 years potentially changing does create challenges for continuity and governance and all of these things. So it is something that I think requires a national debate and then a decision as to how we move forward. So I will agree with you on that. Renewable energy, we didn't deal with in this context because we were dealing with the current operations of Petrotrin. That is something that we are addressing, as I would have indicated to this House previously, but we will address it through another mode. Senator Obika indicated that because the price of oil had improved, that we shouldn't have the problem of losses at Petrotrin. I think that that issue was adequately dealt with by my colleague, the leader of government business, but let me reiterate. It is not the absolute price that is important. It is the relative price of what we pay, what it costs to refine versus what we could sell it at. And as I have indicated, as Senator Khan has indicated, the company now, despite how, because remember, every time the price of oil goes up, we have to continue to purchase 70% of what we need to refine. So the more the price goes up, is the more we pay. And if after paying that significant amount, it costs us more to refine it than we can sell it for, it is not a winning proposition, regardless of how high the price goes. We are not chastising Petrotrin for its contribution to Trinidad and Tobago. We recognize the contribution that Petrotrin has made, but what we are saying is that, as with all businesses, things change, things evolve, they have to be reassessed, and adjustments have to be made to ensure ongoing sustainability. As my colleague Senator Hunte would have said, that was not done in a proactive manner in Petrotrin, which is why we have come to the position where it is a do-or-die situation. We have to make tough decisions. Going forward, as I said, the approach is ensuring that the companies do strategic plans, that we follow up on those plans, and that we ensure that things are moving smoothly, so as and when adjustments need to be made, they can be made proactively. So that is one of the things that we plan to do differently, so that we don't get ourselves back in this position. As I had indicated in the previous debate, we have been taking that approach with the Caribbean Airlines operation, and we are seeing positive results. I heard the CEO reporting a couple of days ago on the operations and results of the company, and you can see that they are making positive strides and performing the way they should be performing. And that is assisted by the fact that from time to time, we call them in, we get a report, we ask questions to ensure that they stay on track. And that is what we will have to do with Petrotrin as well. The issue of the pension plan, again, we dealt with that, but let me reiterate. The pension plan at Petrotrin is currently funded to the tune of $9 billion. The only thing that would put that at risk is if we decided that we were going to wind up the plan and purchase annuities for all the members of the plan. As Senator Khan indicated, that is not even a feasible option because there's no company in Trinidad and Tobago that can bear the cost of such a massive pension plan buyout. So what we propose to do is treat it as a closed plan and continue to pay the pensions as people attain retirement age. In our worst case scenario, we expect that plan to be able to cover its costs and its liabilities up to at least 2040. And the issue will be monitored, investments will be scrutinized so that we can continue to meet our obligations as they arise. And if it doesn't perform as well as we would want it to, then the company will have to take certain decisions. But the actuaries have confirmed to us that the pension plan is in a sound position and it is viable for at least the next 2 decades. So we are not concerned about the pension plan, and I don't want the members of the public and the employees in particular to go away with the concern that there is a risk to their pension plan, because we don't think there is. Senator Hunt adequately dealt with the issue of the challenge to the rate of interest that Petroleum is paying on its bonds, so I will not address that issue again. There is a perception that the government is seeking to conceal information, and that is certainly not the case. This restructuring is a moving target. It is something, what happened was that the government was faced with the performance of Petroleum and faced with the looming payment of the significant bullet payment that is due in 2019. It recognized that what needed to happen was that a decision had to be taken on Petroleum. That took some time because of committees and reports and investigations and consultants. And having taken the decision, the restructuring had to come soon thereafter to give us enough, to give the company enough time to renegotiate that debt. And so it is not something we could have paused and put all the blocks and mortar to before we moved. So we would like to have come to you and say, okay, this is the structure, these are all the directors and consultants and employees and whatever, and can we now agree the vesting order so that we can move forward? But because everything is happening so quickly, we have to move expeditiously to get this done. The vesting order has to be approved before the end of the month to allow the company to go forward with restructuring, to allow it to go forward with its refinancing, so that we are not faced with the problem of a bullet payment that the company can't meet and that the government can't meet in a couple months' time. So it is only that reason that has us in the position where we bring information to you as it becomes available. So, for example, we were not trying to mislead the public when we said to you that we were terminating 2,800 people rather than 5,000 people. We decided what we were going to do was close down the refinery, and there would be job losses. The company then had to make the decision as to whether you terminate everybody and bring back those you want, or you do a BSEP where only some go. So the communication of that while the decision was being made may have led people to think that we were misleading you and giving you conflicting information, but that was not either the purpose or the intention or the approach. So that is the reason why the information is coming to you as it is. So as the Minister of Energy and Energy Industry said, the Minister of Finance, who is the corporation sole, and therefore the shareholder for the government of the company on behalf of the government, is currently working on appointing the board members. There will be some commonality with the current board, depending on the nature of the operation and the company concerned, we may bring in additional directors to support in various areas. And as soon as those decisions are made, they will be public. It is not an intention to hide it. It's just that, as I said, everything is happening at the same time. So, Mr. Vice President, in essence, what we are doing is trying to save a company that we are convinced has a lot of potential, but that has not been maximizing that potential. Because the area where the potential exists, which is production and exploration, has been ignored to be sacrificed for the refinery. The refinery being the part of the operation that is not a sustainable operation. We have to reverse that. We have to make Petrotrin an entity that is no longer awarded the state, that is no longer a drain on the state, that can contribute to the national coffers, that can pay its royalties and supplemental petroleum tax and petroleum profits tax, and hopefully a dividend as well. So that is the only reason we have taken the decision we have taken to restructure Petrotrin. As I said, the company's management and board have looked at it, come up with their plan. They are comfortable, their finances are comfortable, that there is a sound basis to anticipate that they can turn things around. And so that this approach by the government is the only approach that makes sense. For those on the other side who are saying to us, we would never have fired these people, we would not close down the refinery, we would essentially leave things the way we are, the way they are. That reminds me of a very popular saying, or very popular definition. Insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. While I will not draw any conclusions regarding those who have made the comment that we should leave things the way they are, what I can say is that this government is not insane. Not only did we want a change, we need a change in the result of Petrotrin. The only way to get that change is to do things differently. We have done the consultations, we have spoken to all we need to speak to, and we have come up with our plan.
One second. There's no need to talk at the minister when she's speaking. Please allow her to make her contribution. Minister, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Yes, as I was saying, we have looked at it, we have done the consultations, we have met with all the relevant stakeholders, we have come up with a plan that we are comfortable gives us the right result, will give us the right result. It does require ongoing monitoring, as all operations do, and we have been taking that approach. We believe that this will work for the benefit of all of Trinidad and Tobago. The vesting order merely allows us to do the restructuring in a more efficient manner than would have occurred under the normal conveyancing approach. And this is why we have brought the order before you. We are asking for your support so that we can move forward and save the company and save Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Vice President, I thank you, and I beg to move.
Honourable Senators, the question is that a bill entitled An Act to Vest Certain Assets of Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited in Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited, and the Guaracara Refining Company Limited to vest certain assets of Trinidad and Tobago Oil Company Limited and Trinidad and Tobago Petroleum Company Limited in the Guaracara Refining Company Limited, and to vest Palaseco Agricultural Enterprises Limited lands in Heritage Petroleum Company Limited be now read a second time. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. No. I think the ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Vest Certain Assets of Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited in Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited, and the Guaracara Refining Company Limited to vest certain assets of Trinidad and Tobago Oil Company Limited and Trinidad and Tobago Petroleum Company Limited in the Guaracara Refining Company Limited, and to vest Palaseco Agricultural Enterprises Limited lands in Heritage Petroleum Company Limited.
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Mr. Vice President, in accordance with Standing Order 66-1, I beg to move that the bill be committed to a committee of the whole Senate forthwith to be considered clause by clause.
Honourable Senators, the question is that the bill be committed to a committee of the whole Senate forthwith to be considered clause by clause. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. No. I think the ayes have it. The Senate shall now go into committee of the whole to consider the bill clause by clause. Okay, Honourable Senators, there are 8 clauses, 6 schedules, and a preamble in this bill. As per usual, we will go through clause by clause, and no amendments were circulated as far as I'm aware, but as we go through clause by clause, if there are amendments, then you will indicate as such at the appropriate time. Clerk.
Clause 1.
The question is that clause 1 stand part of the bill. The question is that clause 1 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. No. I think the ayes have it. Clause 1 now stands part of the bill.
Clause 2.
The question is that clause 2 stand part of the bill. The question is that clause 2 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. No. I think the ayes have it. Clause 2 now stands part of the bill.
Clause 3.
The question is that clause 3 stand part of the bill. The question is that clause 3 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. No. I think the ayes have it. Clause 3 now stands part of the bill.
Clause 4.
The question is that clause 4 stands part of the bill. The question is that clause 4 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. No. I think the ayes have it. Clause 4 now stands part of the bill.
Clause 5.
The question is that clause 5 stand part of the bill. The question is that clause 5 now stands part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. No. I think the ayes have it. Clause 5 now stands part of the bill.
Clause 6.
The question is that clause 6 stand part of the bill. The question is that clause 6 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. No. I think the ayes have it. Clause 6 now stands part of the bill.
Clause 7.
The question is that clause 7 stand part of the bill. The question is that clause 7 now stands part of the bill. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no.
No.
I think the ayes have it. Clause 7 now stands part of the bill.
Clause 8.
The question is that clause 8 stand part of the bill. The question is that clause 8 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no.
No.
I think the ayes have it. Clause 8 now stands part of the bill.
Schedule 1.
The question is that Schedule 1 stand part of the bill. The question is that Schedule 1 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no.
No.
I think the ayes have it. Schedule 1 now stands part of the bill.
Schedule 2.
The question is that Schedule 2 stands part of the bill. The question is that Schedule 2 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no.
No.
I think the ayes have it. Schedule 2 now stands part of the bill.
Schedule 3.
The question is that Schedule 3 stands part of the bill. The question is that Schedule 3 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no.
No.
I think the ayes have it. Schedule 3 now stands part of the bill.
Schedule 4.
The question is that Schedule 4 stand part of the bill. The question is that Schedule 4 now stands part of the bill. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no.
No.
I think the ayes have it. Schedule 4 now stands part of the bill.
Schedule 5.
The question is that Schedule 5 stand part of the bill. The question is that Schedule 5 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no.
No.
I think the ayes have it. Schedule 5 now stands part of the bill.
Schedule 6.
The question is that Schedule 6 stand part of the bill. The question is that Schedule 6 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no.
No.
I think the ayes have it. Schedule 6 now stands part of the bill.
Preamble.
The question is that the preamble to the bill be approved. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no.
No.
I think the ayes have it. The preamble to the bill is approved. Honorable Senators, the question is that the bill be now reported to the Senate. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no.
No.
I think the ayes have it. The bill will now be reported to the Senate. Ministry of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I wish to report that a bill entitled Miscellaneous Provisions, Heritage Petroleum, Paria Fuel Trading, and Guaracara Refining Vesting Bill 2018 was considered in committee and was approved without amendment. I now beg to move that the Senate agree with the committee's report.
Honorable Senators, the question is that this Senate agree with the committee's report on a bill entitled Miscellaneous Provisions, Heritage Petroleum, Paria Fuel Trading, and Guaracara Refining Vesting Bill 2018. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no.
No.
I think the ayes have it.
Division.
Mr. Khan?
Yes.
Mrs. Gopi Schoon?
Yes.
Mrs. Batiste Primus?
Yes.
Mr. Rambarat?
Yes.
Mr. Sinanan?
Yes.
Mr. Moses?
Yes.
Mr. Hussain? Ms. West?
Yes.
Mr. Lehunt?
Yes.
Dr. Henry?
Yes.
Mr. Singh?
Yes.
Mr. Cummings?
Yes.
Mr. Dookie?
Yes.
Mr. Simonet?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Mark?
No, no.
Ms. Haynes?
No.
Ms. Kat? Ms. Amin? Sorry.
No.
Mr. Hussein?
No.
Mr. Obika?
No.
Mr. Ramdeen?
Absolutely no. Everything on lit.
Mr. Richards?
Abstain.
Ms. Stewart?
Abstain.
Dr. Deyalsingh?
Abstain.
Ms. Deonarine? Mrs. Deonarine?
Abstain.
Ms. Seepersad?
Abstain.
Mr. Tima?
Abstain.
Abstain, right? 15, 6, 6. Six against and 6 abstentions.
Honorable Senators, the results of the division are 15 for, 6 against, and 6 abstention. The question that this Senate agree with the committee's report on a bill entitled Miscellaneous Provisions, Heritage, Petroleum, Paria Fuel Trading, and Guaracara Refining Vesting Bill 2018 is approved.
A bill entitled An Act to Vest Certain Assets of Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited in Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited, and the Guaracara Refining Company Limited. To vest certain assets of Trinidad and Tobago Oil Company Limited and Trinidad and Tobago Petroleum Company Limited in the Guaracara Refining Company Limited, and to vest Palaseco Agricultural Enterprises Limited lands in Heritage Petroleum Company Limited.
Honorable Senators, the question is that a bill entitled An Act to Vest Certain Assets of Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited in Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited, and the Guaracara Refining Company Limited to vest certain assets of Trinidad and Tobago Oil Company Limited and Trinidad and Tobago Petroleum Company Limited in the Guaracara Refining Company Limited, and to vest Palaseco Agricultural Enterprises Limited lands in Heritage Petroleum Company Limited be now read a third time and passed. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. No. I think the ayes.
Division.
Mr. Khan?
Yes.
Mrs. Gopi Schoon?
Yes.
Mrs. Batiste Primus?
Yes.
Mr. Rambarat?
Yes.
Mr. Sinana?
Yes.
Mr. Dennis Moses?
Yes.
Mr. Hussein?
Yes.
Ms. West?
Yes.
Mr. Lehunt?
Yes.
Dr. Henry?
Yes.
Mr. Singh?
Yes.
Mr. Cummings?
Yes.
Mr. Dookie?
Yes.
Mr. Simonet?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Ma?
No.
Ms. Haynes?
No.
Ms. Khan? Ms. Amin?
No.
Sorry. Mr. Hussein?
Absolutely not. No.
Mr. Obika?
No.
Mr. Ramdeen?
No.
Mr. Richards?
Abstain.
Ms. Stewart?
Abstain.
Dr. Deyalsingh,
Abstain.
Mrs. Deonarine,
Abstain.
Ms. Seepersad,
Abstain.
Mr. Timal.
Abstain.
Mr. Vice President, the result of the division is 15 for, 6 against, and 6 abstentions.
Honorable Senators, the results of the division are as follows: 15 for, 6 against, and 6 abstention. The bill shall now be read a third time and passed.
A bill entitled An Act to Vest Certain Assets of Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited in Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited, and the Guaracara Refining Company Limited to vest certain assets of Trinidad and Tobago Oil Company Limited and Trinidad and Tobago Petroleum Company Limited in the Guaracara Refining Company Limited, and to vest Palaseco Agricultural Enterprises Limited lands in Heritage Petroleum Company Limited.
Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Vice President, I beg to move that the Senate do now adjourn to Tuesday, the 27th of November, 2018 at 1:30 p.m. That's Private Members' Day, and from my understanding, the opposition will be debating the Petrotrin issue. Again.
Honorable Senators, before I move the motion on the adjournment, approval has been given for 2 matters on the adjournment to be raised. Senator Obika.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. As I rise to raise this matter on the adjournment, the motion for the adjournment of the Senate, it speaks to the theme of today, which is International or Universal Children's Day, regarding rising youth unemployment and its implications for economic development and social peace. Now, it is clear that the government has placed the nation's youth under attack, Mr. Vice President, and this can have a deleterious impact on social peace, as it is the nation's youth that are always historically at the heart of social upheavals, whether it be in the 1890s, whether it be 1904, the Red House, the water riots, whether it be 1937 with the Butler riots, 1970 from the university students in what is called the revolution of the masses of Trinidad and Tobago. Not the Black Power movement. The proper name is the revolution of the masses of Trinidad and Tobago. And then 1990. So what any social upheaval in this country, at the heart of it has been youth, and more so, educated youth. So furthermore, if the youth of this country are not engaged productively, they cannot be expected to be contributing to national development. And as the saying goes, idle hands, I can't say the other part, there's a negative outcome. So the areas that prove this government has placed the nation's youth under attack, there are 6 areas. 1, high youth unemployment. Based on the antiquated statistics from the Central Statistical Office, which carries you only up to the end of September 2017, since this PNM government has come into office, 18,800 youth have lost jobs. The total number employed has dropped by 18,800 up to September ended last year. We can only guess what is the figure now. And since a lot of the persons being retrenched summarily from Petrotrin would be classified as youth, that is persons under the age of 35, so I'm taking, based on CSO statistics, 20 to 34 years, that age group. The other point is narrowing of the GATE program, virtually almost closing it entirely, outright, especially with particular institutions. For example, Mr. Vice President, if you want to be a chartered accountant today because the University of the West Indies has ceased to offer accounting at the master's level, at the graduate level, in Trinidad and Tobago. So if you want to be a chartered accountant, which is pertinent to every single institution in Trinidad and Tobago, you cannot access GATE to be that. You have to get it at a private institution. And many of those institutions, they have taken the GATE program away from them. I was at one pre-budget consultation and they were lamenting this. This is an accounting school. Many schools across the country, significant professions have been cut out of the GATE program unceremoniously by this government. They have been stifling on the job training program. This points to the total incompetence of the Minister of Labour, Mr. Vice President. And just before the election, they're going to be bringing it back to give our youth 2 years of butter. 2 years of butter after the salt they suck in for 3 years. Number 4, collapse of the graduate employment schemes. They promised graduate employment ho-to-to. Well, we know that was a farce. Number 5, unemployment of a reported 200 plus doctors. And in this country of Trinidad and Tobago, if you say you are a doctor, that is an aspirational position. So can you imagine the impact, the negative impact on the aspirations of all our youth who would ask if they could keep doctors on the breadline? Who is me? You understand? Who am I? Who want to be probably a finance person, an engineer, a semi-skilled person, you know? Who am I? If they could keep doctors on the breadline, who am I? Number 6, shutting down skills acquisition campuses of the National Energy Skills Center, which effectively locks out our young persons from the skilled and semi-skilled jobs, which are very lucrative in manufacturing, in oil and gas and industry. Now, Mr. Vice President, under Goal 8 of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development of the International Labour Organization, titled Decent Work and Economic Growth, the ILO has sought to buttress the Millennium Development Goals by seeking to promote inclusive and sustainable economic growth, employment, and decent work for all. And the ILO reiterated that all must share in economic progress and national advancement. All must share. This government has failed, therefore, to place job creation at the heart of economic policy making and development plans, in particular for the youth. Under the PNM, this nation has seen youth struggling to progress. I told you of 18,800 youth unemployed, and I reminded you that every single generation in the history of Trinidad and Tobago, since the end of chattel slavery, has been visited with an upheaval of youth in this country. And if this government is not careful, they will precipitate with the closure of Petroleum, another of such. So the majority of persons who are without jobs are youth in Trinidad and Tobago. The ILO said it's a virtuous cycle that is as good for the economy as it is for people when one drives sustainable development. Now, one point I want to raise is if you look at what happened before 2015, at Q2 2015, which was the last full quarter of the People's Partnership government, the persons with jobs in the age group mentioned was 35,000, 20 to 24 years old. Well, 25 to 29 years old and 30 to 34 years old was 143,000. It has dropped to 124,200, 18,800. In the category 20 to 24 years, thank you, Mr. Vice President, the unemployment rate is 9.9%, 10%. In 25 to 29 years is 7.7%, roughly 8% unemployment. What this country needs is to arrest this situation. This government must put youth employment at the top of the agenda graduate unemployment must be a thing of the past, and Petrotrin hires approximately 200 per year in the graduate program.
So that's gone too.
So that has gone as well. The government must put jobs of the future, including coding, the Internet of Things, computerized numerical control, and app development at the center of learning, and must provide jobs. Provide jobs for our nation's youth before they precipitate another such social upheaval in Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you.
Mr. Vice President, I rise at 12:09 a.m. to respond to some of the most outrageous, outlandish, ridiculous, and untrue statements made by Senator Obika. You know, one thing about the opposition, they remain consistent. Fake news. They just pluck wild figures out of their fertile imagination and puts it into the record without substantiating anything that they say. So it is my duty to debunk the untruth that my colleague, Senator Obika, Mr. Vice President,
Oh my God.
Senator Obika speaks about 18,800 youths losing their jobs in this country. Where did he get those figures from? Where? Those figures did not come from the CSO. Those figures did not come from the CSO.
Standing order.
Then he made...
Standing order 46-6, imputing improper motives. Remember, it's false. It is from the CSO. Central Bank has an economic bulletin.
Senator.
Do not embarrass yourself.
Senator.
It is from the CSO.
Senator.
It is from the CSO. Do not embarrass yourself. Do not embarrass yourself. If you don't know better, be quiet.
Freedom Center Mark.
Senator Obika, I think you are well aware by now that that kind of behavior is not to be tolerated. At no point in any proceedings of the Senate, if you have a point of order to raise, you state the point of order and allow the chair to rule upon that point of order. What you just did is out of order. Do not let it happen again, ever. Minister, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for restoring the dignity of this House. Senator Obika stood on his legs and he spoke about stifling of the OJT program, another untruth, not substantiating that either in this House. I think we have all become accustomed to the manner in which he treats with information in a very untruthful way. But, Mr. Vice President...
The member is imputing improper motives.
Continue, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I am a woman of great patience. I have children and grandchildren who behave just like that.
Standing order 46-4, it is offensive and insulting.
That's what you got. Your leader is always saying, I'm a mother and a mother.
Can I have silence, please? Minister, continue your response, but just temper the language a bit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Senator Obika stood on his legs here a short while ago and accused this government of stifling the OJT program. No evidence to support that. And it is my responsibility to debunk such untrue statements. Mr. Vice President, the government in our 2015 manifesto policy document articulates the position that our youth are vital to the future development of this country. We agree that youths must be nurtured, they must be listened to, they must be protected, they must be encouraged, they must be given proper guidance and easy access to education and personal development, healthcare, and meaningful employment. They must also be supported and provided with the means to grow and develop. In addition, they must be given opportunities to participate in government and the public and private sector at the highest levels. Mr. Vice President, the government's intervention in addressing youth unemployment is reflected in the implementation of a host of programs, initiatives by a cross-section of the social sector ministries and agencies. Mr. Vice President, the government of Trinidad and Tobago continues to play its part by investing in ways to improve the lot of the youths in this country. Mr. Vice President, the on-the-job training program, which was formerly under the Ministry of Tertiary Education, was placed under the Ministry of Labor in September 2015 and became a division under the Ministry of Labor and Small Enterprise Development with effect from June last year. Mr. Vice President, this program is geared towards addressing the challenge of adequately preparing our youths to meet the labor market needs and to fit in the ever-changing structure of a modern organization. These youths are given the opportunity to apply their acquired knowledge in a safe environment that stimulates maximum exposure to the field of their choice. We help build their career paths. Mr. Vice President, this program, the OJT program, facilitates internship across a wide spectrum of industries, including civil and mechanical engineering, social work, legal, agriculture, education, information technology, accounting, business, health, and much more. It is important to note that vocational qualifications are not sidelined by the program in favor of academics. Every attempt is made to include persons who have vocational training. Mr. Vice President, this program facilitates trainee placements at 5 qualification levels, and I would advise Senator Obika to pay particular attention. Level 1, high school passes. Level 2, craft level certification. Level 3, advanced proficiency diplomas. Level 4, associate degrees. Level 5, undergraduate degrees. And level 6, master's degree. We place all our young people with those qualifications into the private sector, into the public sector, and into NGOs, Mr. Vice President.
Senator, you have 2 minutes.
The total trainees in this critical OJT program at this point in time is 3,195 when you remove the exits, because you can only stay in the program 2 years, from 16 years to 35 years. This government took a decision to increase that amount to 5,000 in this year, in this fiscal year, Mr. Vice President. The Ministry of Labor, we have continuous interviews taking place with all these young people coming in with hopes that we meet by ensuring they are placed in employment in keeping with their career paths. Mr. Vice President, so that this motion that Senator Obika has placed before this House lacks credibility. It lacks factual information and therefore ought to be discounted. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Senator Mark.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, over the last few days, the telecommunications services of Trinidad and Tobago has retrenched over 500 workers. Mr. Vice President, we are advised by TSTT that another 200 workers will be soon retrenched. That followed on the heels in 2014 of some 400 workers via a voluntary separation program or package. So, Mr. Vice President, we are talking about in the space of less than 4 years, 14, 16, yes, 4 years, the TSTT would have retrenched some 1,100 workers. We are also advised that the government of Trinidad and Tobago owes TSTT for CCTV services some $400 million or thereabouts. We are also advised, and it's a fact, Mr. Vice President, that one of their financiers, Neil and Massey or Massey, in some deal, they were able to purchase Massey Communication for $250 million. And up to this time, we as a parliament cannot get the sale agreement on that matter, even though we have demanded it as a parliament up to this day. So we don't know, Mr. Vice President, what is true and what is false in that whole scenario that took place, Mr. Vice President. So they owe TSTT over 400 million, I understand. They had this deal with Massey, one of their financiers, for 250 million. And Mr. Vice President, on the heels of that, what did the TSTT did? Its board and management, they retrenched close to 500 workers. And they are threatening to retrench over 200 workers in the coming months. That is for the deal that they arrived at with Massey Communication. So the workers are paying for a deal with Massey Communication. So 500 of them home and 200 more going home because of corruption on the part of the government and the TSTT management and board. Workers must pay that price. And you know, Mr. Vice President, what is even more alarming? They hypocritically tell this country and the workers that they have offered them enhanced packages. What do you mean by that, Mr. Vice President? They are saying under the Retrenchment and Severance Benefits Act, the workers are really entitled to 2 weeks' pay for each year of service. But what they are not telling the workers, Mr. Vice President, under the same Retrenchment and Severance Benefits Act, Section 18, subsection 2, where a subsisting collective agreement exists, once the terms and conditions are superior to that of the Severance and Retrenchments Benefit Act. What will take precedence? 18.2, the collective agreement. So there is no enhanced package for the workers, as they are claiming. Mr. Vice President, I want to let you know that the government of this country have embarked on a campaign of union busting. And I want the Minister of Public Utilities to be conscious of what is taking place at that place called TSTT. Mr. Vice President, would you believe that under the watch of the Minister of Public Utilities, they have literally dismissed through this retrenchment of over 500 workers the following union officials. This is why I tell you, Mr. Vice President, the government of Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley is under a union busting strategy, and the TSTT is part of that strategy. Mr. Vice President, tell me if you don't agree with me. Mr. Vice President, I have information from the Communications Workers Union as it relates to the number of union executive officers who have been targeted by TSTT in terms of retrenchment. Mr. Vice President, the Secretary General was retrenched. They targeted the Secretary General of the Communication Workers Union for retrenchment. The minister should know this, and if he's not a union buster himself, he should take action against the people involved. Mr. Vice President, the education officer of the union has been busted. They lick him, well, let me say lick him up. They have dismissed him, Mr. Vice President. The trustee has been sent home. Another trustee has been sent home. That is 4, Mr. Vice President, from the head branch. Mr. Vice President, in the southern branch, they sent home, they targeted the Secretary Treasurer, a member of the Management Committee, another member of the Management Committee, the chairperson of the senior staff in South. They target, Mr. Vice President, the people who they want to bust and lick up and destroy, Mr. Vice President. In the Eastern Division and branch of the union, they target the Secretary Treasurer, retrench. They target a General Council member, retrench. They target a shop steward, retrench. In the Western branch, Mr. Vice President, they have retrenched close to 9 union members, Mr. Vice President. In fact, 11. Mr. Vice President, in your own little island that they want to corrupt through sandals, Tobago, Mr. Vice President, they have targeted a union official. Her name is Karen Dutton. She's the Secretary Treasurer of the Tobago branch of the TSTT. But you know what they did today? Mr. Vice President, because you had a convention, when I say you, the party that you belong to, had a convention in Tobago. You know what they did? Today, Mr. Vice President, because they know I was bringing this here today, Mr. Vice President, they sent a letter to this girl called Karen Dutton, actually taking back, rescinding the decision to retrench her. And she is now back on the job. Because they know we were bringing this matter today. And they didn't want to embarrass the Vice President. They didn't want to embarrass the Vice President because he's from Tobago. You understand? So
just I think you're aware of the standing order of introducing or bringing the chair into the debate. Just advising.
So, Mr. Vice President, I understand. I'm just teasing you. So, Mr. Vice President, I understand. Mr. Vice President, so all I'm saying, Mr. Vice President, is that when you look at the figures, you will see, Mr. Vice President, out of 500 workers, they have actually targeted close to 25 members of the union who are officers of the union, Mr. Vice President, including the highest office leader or union leader, that is Secretary General, Mr. Clyde Elder. Mr. Vice President, what is that? If that is not union busting, I don't know what is. So, Mr. Vice President, I call on the minister today to level with this parliament and to tell this parliament what is he doing about these workers who have been targeted specially for retrenchment. Mr. Vice President, I thank you.
Minister of Public Utilities.
Mr. Vice President, we are here today to talk about the Telecommunications Services of Trinidad and Tobago, TSTT, and the fact that TSTT is saving by its actions over 1,300 jobs, given the present reality that the organization finds itself in. Today's story is not about retrenchment. It's definitely not about targeting anyone in particular. Today's story is about survival and remaining relevant so that the organization can continue to provide gainful employment for over 1,300 employees. Mr. Vice President, the age of digital disruption has affected the world of business in such a fundamental or monumental way that it is absolutely necessary that businesses have a complete paradigm shift in their business model if a company is to remain relevant and successful. Mr. Vice President, TSTT operations operates in a very dynamic environment. The telecommunications industry is rapidly evolving into a realm of rapidly evolving into a realm that is heavily focused on digital technology, such as artificial intelligence, robotics, and Internet of Things, and other telecommunication advancements that continue to dictate the pace of TSTT's operations. In the world of business, evolution is a must. Companies must strategically adopt new approaches and even new business models if they want to remain relevant and profitable. Just recently, global retail giant Sears announced it was closing another 44 stores after closing 188 stores. Reason being the whole idea of competition with online shopping. Mr. Vice President, this reality is no different to TSTT. Global digital disruption in the telecommunication industry continue to pose a threat to TSTT's business, and a change in the company's business model is now necessary. These disruptions include global adoption of over-the-top solutions for communications and entertainment driven by internet users and bypassing traditional telecommunication systems, not to mention the ever-changing customer demands, particularly around high-speed internet requirements, value for money global standards for quality assurance. TSTT must adopt a strategic approach, which I am confident to say the company has done, to ensure that the company not only survives the digital era, but it becomes profitable once again. Could you imagine what will happen to TSTT if the company did not embark on this strategic approach? I don't think I have to remind all of us here that we all know what happened to similar type companies like BlackBerry and Nokia when they were leaders in their particular industry. They did not change with the particular time and with the industry, and now we could hardly hear or we know much about them. It is in this context that I say TSTT faces the same predicament. Having previously enjoyed a monopoly for a long time, TSTT is not only faced with intense competition, but also with the inability to be sufficiently agile. In its current state, the company cannot successfully surpass its competition and maintain its market share. And such a proactive approach to the company's transformation is urgently needed. Mr. Vice President, TSTT is a company that recently in the last year's financial faced a $32 million operating deficit. The last 6 months financials, the company showed $478 million loss. Even when you take and you discount the one-off item previously talked about, you are talking about $120 million operating loss. Business cannot continue as you see. You move from 60 million to 120 million in 6 months operating loss. TSTT has been plagued with problems with high employee costs that is way above the industry average. They have a wage bill of $768 million. And when you look at the productivity levels compared to industry standard, again, they are way below the industry standard. Mr. Vice President, with this continued erosion in the profitability and reduction of the company's revenue, organizational realignment is mandatory. I believe we can safely say that if TSTT continues with existing employee costs, the company will be insolvent. If TSTT has no business, does not get into a new business model, and do not put things in order, it is estimated that with the level of losses that the company has been incurring, by the year 2022, the company's equity base will be totally eradicated. TSTT was a company, right? Was a company that was the largest non-oil producer owned by the government with regard to taxes. You are now in a situation that TSTT, because of the changing time, is now in a situation whereby they are losing money. TSTT major shareholder, 51%, is now owned by NEL. NEL has shareholders who are Trinidadians and Tobagonians, over 5,000 of them who invested in NEL. When TSTT continued to lose money, it means the dividends that NEL is able to pay to the shareholders of Trinidad and Tobago, including pension plans, they will not be able to pay. TSTT as a company cannot continue. The management of TSTT is taking action. They put a new business plan in place, and they are executing that digitalization business plan. They are going to their zero copper strategy, and they are taking actions to move this company to a position that could be profitable once more, it could be agile, and it could be in a position to meet the competition and provide a lot better service. When you look at the jobs that TSTT has on its records, you are talking about today legacy jobs since the days of Textel. People still have jobs like that are still on the records. Telephone booth operators. These are jobs that a company cannot, a new agile company, you cannot compete with Digicel. You cannot compete with Flow when you yourself have a staff like this and you have a lot of legacy jobs. Companies are wrong, even Digicel themselves. In this present environment, they have restructured. All the companies around the world, telecommunication companies around the world, they are restructuring. Not because you are a union employee in ways that you cannot be touched. TSTT's management are making the correct decisions for once again for the sustainment of the company and to protect the jobs of 1,300 employees. I have confidence that they are doing the job that is required to ensure that the service to the Trinidad and Tobago public and to ensure the survival of all stakeholders. This is not about union busting. This is about protecting the jobs of 1,300 people, because if we do not, and if the company doesn't take the action now, the company will be no more. And you know what will happen at that time? There will be no company to employ anyone, because they will lose their market share totally. And not only the union, the 20 unionized members will have lost their jobs, every single one will have lost their jobs. This is not about singling out anyone. This is not about trying to union bust. This is about putting a company back on a new trajectory that will allow it to be profitable and be able to compete and continue to make a contribution to the coppers of Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you.
Honourable Senators, the question is that this Senate do now adjourn to Tuesday, the 27th of November, 2018 at 1:30 p.m. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. The Senate now stands adjourned to Tuesday, the 27th of November, 2018 at 1:30 p.m.